Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that you guys can join me this morning. It is Friday, as some people like to call it. Let me get this straight just to make sure. Yeah, it is Friday. Hope you guys are doing okay wherever you are. If you're under the sound of this voice, welcome to the show. You have my deepest appreciation for being at this show. You could be anywhere, and yet you find yourself to be here at this esteemed establishment. So thank you for being here. It is my last day here. It is my last day here. And I will be leaving here tomorrow. And so I am looking forward to the trip, to be in a new location, new energy, and all that good stuff. I will be back on Monday. And hopefully it is... I got to be honest, I've loved this space that I could create for the studio. And so I'm hoping that something similar can effectively be effectuated in the new location. So there's that. If you guys find yourself coming back to this location often, as I said, this esteemed establishment often, like the video, share the video. If you find that you like the video, yes, it's a bit presumptive, but hopefully you guys like it. We have a damn good show for you today. Dr. Jeff Rich is going to start the show off. Caleb Maupin is going to be on at 8. Jim Jatras is going to be on at 9. And Dimitri Lascaris is going to be on at 9:30. So we have a full show and a damn good one. Also, shout out to the audience. Was it Rest in Peace, Finland? Shout out to the audience. Shout out to the chat. Welcome to the show, guys. Siversk has fallen. Siversk has fallen or liberated, depending upon the way you actually look at it. Now, this show has pointed out on more than one occasion that what you're going to have is several locations falling in rapid succession. That for a while, you have these small locations that are falling, these small villages. There's so many, they're too numerous to name, and they're taking place like back to back to back. Oftentimes we don't even cover because they're so numerous. I mean, you would effectively be in shows all day covering these small locations. Siversk is supposed to be a fortress city. And this goes along with Pokrovsk, Leningrad being surrounded. I guess they're mopping up operations in Leningrad. Volchansk, fallen, Siversk, fallen. All of these things have taken place within the course of, a week? The pace of the Russian advance has increased. I don't even know how that's in debate at this point. The pace of the Russian advance has increased. Now, this is the only reason that the Trump administration is doing everything in their power to come up with some kind of quote unquote deal. This is the only reason. If you remember once before, when this was put to, I believe it was J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance made this argument, well, the Russians want something, and we don't think that the situation necessitates what they want. Basically, they're asking for too much. They're asking for too much. Well, what about now, Jeff? Or not Jeff, J.D.? Well, now you have the situation where, oh my God, this is an emergency. The Russians are going to take Donbass. The speed at their advance is increasing exponentially. Ukraine is losing people left and right, not just from the people getting killed, but from desertions. Something needs to be done, and something needs to be done immediately. Meaning, even Trump acknowledged at this point, well, Russia's in a dominant position. Russia has been in a dominant position. It's not just starting in a dominant position. So whether I am not of mind that the U.S. can be trusted. I am not of mind that the U.S. can be trusted. And what you ended up with, Donald Trump, if you remember in his latest thing, he pointed out in his latest, I think he was talking to Politico, he says, well, I think Ukraine should have elections because, it looks pretty bad we don't have elections. And at a certain point, you can't keep calling yourself a democracy if you don't have elections. No duh, right? So what does Zelensky do? Zelensky goes to his European handlers or helpers, people who are effectively irrelevant, hated in their own countries, and gets moral support and comes out and says, well, hey, man, by our laws, we can't really give up territory. Okay, well, by your laws, you weren't supposed to be part of NATO either, but you were able to change those laws. We'll put that to the side. What we may be able to do is to have a referendum. However, we need there to be a ceasefire before there's a referendum. It seems that Zelensky's, when he wakes up in the morning and when he goes to bed at night, is looking for any and every way to get his people killed. Now, mind you, the majority of the population wants a ceasefire. Overwhelming majority. And so the idea that he's doing everything in his power to effectively keep the war going, where you have over 1 million Ukrainian soldiers that are either dead or missing, and that number racks up thousands each month. It's just astonishing. Their capability of being able to defend themselves is diminishing day by day by day, and yet Zelensky is still playing games. So there is that. The Trump administration doesn't seem to want to push him into it by just saying, look, we're out. Trump is trying to make a buck off the deal, no less, which makes it even that much worse. So there is that. This is a catastrophe. And again, I ask the same question I've asked many times before. Can a U.S. president accept Russian terms? Because what Russia's going to say, this is a surrender document, meaning we want your surrender. We will dress this up in language. We will act as if this is some kind of deal. We do all that stuff. This is a surrender. Will that get ratified through Congress? Probably not. Will the Europeans accept it? Probably not. So how do you get a deal done? Or it's a deal that gets done on the battlefield. Now, an argument can be made that between a collapse of the Ukrainian military and the humiliation associated with that versus a humiliating deal, we may accept the deal, depending upon what the deal is. If there is, quote, flexibility in the deal. But again, I don't know how the Russians trust or believe anything that would be in any of these deals, considering Minsk 1 and 2, considering the Istanbul agreements, and considering the long war being ultimately continuing to go after and diminish Russia. I don't have this belief of a come to Jesus. I mean, if you listen to even in the national security strategy, the objective seems to be we need other powers to take over the burden of going after our enemies. If Russia believes that it is not an enemy, then they are deluded. They are deluded. I would imagine that they have full belief at this point in regards to the U.S. intentions and objectives, regardless of the language that they may use in order to try to get some kind of, let's say, bring it into the war. Because I don't have this belief that they want to take all of Ukraine. And so if they can get some kind of agreement, whatever that particular agreement is, especially if it can settle it in a way that they believe is sustainable, then they would take it. As I said, the Russians are chasing safety. I just don't know what that looks like. And up to this point, Trump has been putting out dead letters, which under no circumstances will be accepted. The other thing that has popped up is outright piracy. Call it what it is. Complete and utter piracy. We steal a ship in the Caribbean and we steal the oil from that ship. And Trump brags about stealing the oil from that ship. Now, if you think back, when the Yemenis did this, or Ansar Allah did this, it was outrage. Oh my God, I can't believe this is, this is piracy. This is that. The United States does it. And of course, from our point of view, it is perfectly okay. I'm trying to pull up the video of them doing so. There was no humiliation about it. Trump went so far as to even brag about it, no less. What is it, man? Like, this is a wild space to be in. I've argued on more than one occasion on this show that there is no such thing as international law. And you've had people who are either international lawyers, lawyers in regards to humanitarian law, and they would vociferously argue against that, saying there is international law. And my argument was always, how is there such thing as international law if you have larger players that don't need to follow that law? Meaning, if there is no, if you're in the United States and you are selling marijuana on the street corner, and we have a law against selling marijuana, a police, invariably, especially if the neighbor calls, will come and harass you and maybe even take you to jail because there's a law against it. Even if you are selling huge weight, like even if you're in like the upper echelons of the drug business and you are one of those people that don't typically get arrested, there will be RICO charges that may be applied to you, even if you are millions of dollars in, even if you can bribe various people below, even if you can murder people below in order to save your name. There would be RICO charges brought by the feds in order to go after you because it is against the law. What does it look like if you are stealing ships, outright stealing ships, outright murdering people in boats, effectively fishermen in boats, with impunity? When people scream, well, that's against the law, it rings so hollow. It rings so hollow. It's not even like the United States is even hiding the fact that they're doing it, right? They're doing it with impunity. How, under this model, is there such thing as international law? It's just outrageous. There's also WAPO talking about land swaps and security guarantees. Again, that's a dead on arrival. Russia's not going to accept security guarantees in the context of the United States being involved. You just asked for a third world war. The U.S. demands that the ICC rewrite rules to protect Trump. That's amazing. Hey, I've been murdering people in the Caribbean. I need you to rewrite the rules for the International Criminal Court because I don't want you to come after me after the fact. Or else. Or else. Just outrageous. But my man is here. I see him in the background. Let me go to him. We are joined with the man himself, Dr. Jeff Rich. How you doing, Jeff? You doing okay tonight?
Very well, Jamal. How are you?
I am doing well. I am doing well. Dr. Jeff Rich, he's a historian, author, retired government official from Melbourne, Australia, with a PhD in history and over 3 decades of experience in government. He created the Burning Archive YouTube channel and Substack, where he shares his commentaries, book reviews, interviews on world history, culture, and politics. He has written 4 books, including 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Thank you for joining me, man. I asked you, was there anything on your mind? And you sent me several topics, and all of these topics are fantastic. One of the interesting ones that I think I'm going to hit first, because I'm not going to linger on this one, but alt media reaction to the national security strategy by Trump. And this idea that they immediately fall back into Trump, the peacemaker. Trump, the peacemaker. Trump is really trying to make peace. Like, don't believe your it's like, see, here's this 28-point peace plan. Obviously, he's trying to make peace. He's trying to bring the world together. He's holding a dove in one hand and a lily in the other. And this was always what he wanted to be. Give me your take on that. I mean, obviously, I'm saying this with a huge amount of skepticism because I don't believe this to be true. But give me your thoughts on the way alt media has flipped back onto this.
Yeah, well, they've really had a bit of a pattern about this really for over a year, I think. And, you know, I saw Dimitri Lascaris speak on your show about this topic and also his wonderful monologue about it as well on his show. I think Dimitri's really, sort of correctly assessed the situation, that there are a lot of commentators, a lot of really respected commentators who've done amazing, great work, but who have a couple of very strong attitudes, which are, sort of nationalist versus globalist, which are anti-migration, from a sort of European sort of nationalist perspective. and which are, sort of really believe in the sort of American, I guess, libertarian sort of dream, and hate the EU. And they are wanting to see those attitudes reflected in Trump's policy rather than seeing what Trump and the broader, the broader US government is actually doing. And as a result, they're sort of saying, "Oh yeah, I like what they're saying in the national security strategy, because they're giving Europe a whack." And then claiming that this is realist, but they're not seeing the absolutely just brutal ideological and very, the national security strategy strikes me as very much a internal domestic political campaign document as much as anything within America. It's sort of rallying the MAGA crowd, who are no doubt a bit disappointed after 12 months of failures, and sort of switching over from Russia as the bogeyman to Europe as the bogeyman really now. So yeah, I think it's been quite disappointing, really, including some like even people like Glenn Deason, I think. Sort of like wanting to have their initial hopes in Trump vindicated, wanting themselves not to be exposed as wishful thinkers and all that sort of thing. And I think some of their coverage has just been really poor. And it's actually something I did a video on the Duran actually back in February, because some of this overly positive valuation of Trump was evident even then. So yeah,
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. You asked your question.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I was one of those people that was open.
Yeah.
Like, it was kind of like, okay, let's just see what happens. Like, meaning I don't believe one way or the other. The guy runs saying he's going to end the war, and he does so for the entire election, right? And he uses it as a political weapon. And, at the point where where they shut down the radio station, and you're like, all right, well, let's see what Trump does. Let's just see what happens. And then you get within 24 hours and the war's not over with. Okay, well, there's a 24-hour idea. And then you get for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And then he puts out an absurd plan that is like, this is a dead letter. I mean, before even the 28-point plan, like the first plan that he put out was like, this is absurd. You can't be serious. He's not being serious right now. And at that point, it's like, okay, well, obviously he's not being serious. Okay, well, that should have been, if you had to wait that long, the turn where you realize whatever Trump wants to do, an American president can't accept the level of failure that he would need to accept to end this war. Meaning either he needs to walk just outright, like, I'm done, I'm out, or any kind of deal would be on Russian terms. I don't think he can do it. I just don't think, and this idea of, I just hate seeing people die is nonsense. It's just nonsense. He doesn't care about that.
No. And look, really, anyone who took his comment that he could solve the war in 24 hours at all seriously, or even interpreted that as a serious reflection upon the situation, it really needs to have a good hard look at themselves in terms of the quality of their analytical skills, because of course he's not going to be able to solve it in 24 hours. It's just a totally absurd comment. It's just pure ridiculous bluster, but people have just wanted to believe it. It was, it was so, in some ways that was evident even before he got into office. And then he gave his inauguration address, which was, dressed up in sort of manifest destiny rhetoric and planting the stars and stripes on Mars and all this, we're going to conquer Greenland and conquer the Panama Canal. And Alexander Dimitrius says, this is the greatest political speech since Oliver Cromwell. I can't believe it. There's an American Revolution happening.
None of those speeches were good. All of those speeches were like, he was a maniac in all of those speeches. It's like, it's outrageous. Exactly. Like the idea that you're saying you're going to take Greenland. I don't care what Greenland thinks. I don't care what Denmark thinks. That's pretty outrageous. Oh, we're going to take Panama. Okay, again, that's pretty outrageous. That's not a peace president. Like, and you could see it like attacking Iran, going back on the Gaza deal. None of these things, attacking Yemen, none of these things are indicative of somebody who's just standing there trying to make peace. And this is nonsense. It's just propaganda. So
exactly. So so it's pretty bad. And I mean, I think Dimitri was pretty balanced and fair-minded in his assessment and said it, that it was because they, there were aspects of Trump's agenda around business regulation and, the sort of crypto bro, sort of techno-libertarian types that had drawn these people in. And it didn't reflect a failure of analytical skills or potential compromise of interests, etc. I'm not so sure I'd be quite as generous as Dimitri in my assessment of it. But because I mean, I think the types of analytical failures that were evident in those kind of assessments of Trump have been there, for a long time, and they keep happening, and this silly idea that somehow this is a realist policy it just exposes the thinking. But I probably shouldn't go too far down that route, or
no, you're fine. I take them as being honest actors. Like, well, I can't say all of them. I take Alexander Dimitrius as being an honest actor.
Yeah.
I think they're just wrong, if that makes sense. Like for example,
I think so.
When Alexander points out, well, Europe still believes that Ukraine has a chance to win it, and Ukraine can do that Europe is just unclear on the situation. I'm like, dude, why do you think that? And by the way, love Alexander Dimitrius, so this is no shade on him. I think from their point of view, as you point out, some of this is wishful thinking. And some of this is, well, maybe a deal has to come about. Maybe they will get a deal. Maybe, et cetera. Maybe Trump is trying to get a deal. And by the way, I do think Trump wants a deal. He just wants it on his terms, which I think is absurd.
No, that's right. Yeah. He just wants to get out with no blame and as much loot as he can manage, and move on to a different political sort of story, and also to shift the political narrative within America from the Democrat progressive Russia's the bogeyman to now Europe's the bogeyman, and to also sort of, I guess perhaps, and quite a lot of the Ukrainian press are talking about this too, that it's part of the sort of the revenge for the sort of Russiagate sort of saga as well, to sort of expose some of the involvement of the sort of Atlanticist crowd in the whole Ukraine situation. So
there's I would imagine part of the other reason to this is a blame game that's going to come up. That inevitably will take place, and that everybody seems to be positioning for the blame game, where Europe seems to be like, hey, we were with them ride or die, but America pulled out, and Trump is going to probably come up with his own narrative. Give me a take on this. I mean, is this going to work, I suppose?
Well, look, I just think the situation is going to be so catastrophic ultimately in Ukraine that people attempt to maneuver it, maneuver to blame. Europe's attempting to blame Trump, and Trump's attempting to blame Europe and Kiev. But I just can't see it as being ultimately controllable. And again, this is the thing. A lot of the alt media will say, the European leaders are just, about to lose their political careers. Their negotiation strategy is defined by saving their political skins and avoiding the embarrassment of this defeat in the war. But then they don't say the same thing about Donald Trump, because that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing as well.
Yeah.
So I do think that's a big factor. But I think the other big factor is the kind of war debt issue. I mean, I think a lot of the conflict and tension between Ukraine, Europe, and the US in terms of negotiating an acceptable terms of this, acceptable terms to end the war, is about who pays in the end. And the 28-point peace plan was everyone but the US pays, and everyone pays the US. It's sort of, that was basically the plan. You steal Russian assets for us, and we'll take the profits from it. So I do think that is a very, very big factor. And so I think that is as much a factor in terms of the tensions between Europe and the US as the sort of political issues or the cultural warrior issues or that sort of thing, or a lack of realism. And the thing I really think, and I think John Helmer makes this point too, that's really wrong in a lot of the alt media's analysis of the various negotiation positions, is there's this meme of the childish Europeans, the selfish Europeans, the Europeans who, unless the Americans are there, will start fighting World War II again. All this sort of infantilization of the Europeans. And I just don't think it is a serious sort of kind of analysis. I mean, yes, they are involved in awkward political posturing at the moment because they're in a very difficult position. They're sort of trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear to some degree, but they are being calculating political actors within their circumstances. And so you have to actually look at what they're trying to achieve within their circumstances, try and look at what is the difference between the public positioning and the private negotiations. And that sort of stuff has been, evident during the week. There's been talk about Maloney having a difficult heart-to-heart with Zelensky to say, look, it's over, Volodymyr. You're going to have to make some concessions. And presumably that is, perhaps that's one of Maloney's designated roles. And it also means you don't pick up the differences between the different European groups, which, so you've got Germany, Britain and France off on one angle, and then you have the Orban and the Czechs and the Slovaks, and then you have Maloney, I think, playing a slightly different role in the sort of no way I'm going to let Starmer and Macron get the kudos out of this, and is probably a little bit more congenial to giving Trump a win. And a bit more of a pragmatic compromiser, perhaps. So if you put aside the sort of stereotypes and the cliches and the sort of insult comedy, really, just calling Europeans European leaders children and things like that, I think you can actually pick up some different aspects to how the negotiations are going down. And they do seem to be, I mean, there seem to be significant developments really in the next couple of days. And I think it's going to be a bit of a tricky situation for the Russians as well, because they're going to be, I mean, it looks like Europe, US, Ukraine are again trying to maneuver Russia into being the gainsayers of a potential peace deal.
Yeah.
And yeah, things do seem to be approaching, because also what is, from the sounds of what's been reported as the potential deal to be discussed, it's really not adequate, I would have thought, from a Russian point of view.
A few points. Points. I feel like I have to defend Americans or Americans.
That's okay. I've got to bag America occasionally. It's part of the fun of the
No. I hit the States all the time, but it's in the context of the Europeans. One, Meloni could convince me of anything. If I was Zelensky, I would have ended the war the moment that she would have asked me, like, okay. The woman is gorgeous. Two, we didn't infantilize Europe. They infantilized themselves. The idea that Mark Rutte is calling Trump daddy is humiliating. We didn't do that. Nobody, like America, didn't say, hey, I need you to call me daddy. They did that. We didn't do that. And the situation that they found themselves is a situation of their own making. Nobody told them to destroy their economies for the dignity and, the benefit of America. They did that. Like, in fact, none of this is in Europe's best interest. That we blew up Nord Stream pipeline. And what was the response of the Europeans? Russia did it. All of them know that Joe Biden came out and overtly said, if Russia goes in, we will blow up their pipeline. We would stop their pipeline. The pipeline blows up and they're like, hey, man, we're unclear on how this happened or who did this. Those are European actions. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if there's any infantilization of Europeans, they infantilize themselves. They are playing that role. It's like my ex used to say, "Don't treat me like a child," and it's like, dude.
Sorry, say what?
My ex used to say, like, sometimes we get into a conversation and she'll say something like, "You're treating me like a child," and it's like, dude, you're acting like a child. It's like, that's not my fault. Like, if I'm explaining something to you, like, if we are engaging each other in a way where one person takes a parental role, despite the fact that we're near the same age, that's not me intentionally trying to do that. That wasn't the way I worked with my ex-wife. That wasn't the way I worked with any of my exes, right? It's the relationship and the way that we engage with each other. I'm saying that is the way that the Europeans, that's the role that they tuck themselves in, where they don't want to stand up on their own. They don't, the relationship with China is a really good example. It will be in Europeans' best interests to have a relationship with China. What did Macron do? Macron goes over to Beijing or China. He wasn't in Beijing. He was in a different part of Beijing. I mean, a different part of China. And comes back, and what's the first thing he does? Immediately bashes China the moment that he gets back on European soil. Who are they doing this for? The Dutch, when they turn around and take next Syria. Who are they doing this for? I hope you get my point. I guess my thing is...
Yeah, no, look, I agree with you. And I think there is a sense in which, but I think it's not about the European elites being children. It's the phenomenon of a decades-long process of the creation of sort of, Euro-Atlantic elites, a sort of a network of Euro-Atlantic elites who are as much loyal to, if you like, the American empire as they are to their individual states, or at least are pursuing the interests of their individual states within, I guess, the framework of the sort of American empire. And I think, though, one of the risks of this sort of infantilized sort of argument, or the silly, the silly, senseless, mindless European sort of argument, is, I mean, I've just been tuning into some of the European media just over the last couple of days just to see how people have been responding to the whole NSS, sort of thing. And I wouldn't underestimate the extent to which people, it's sort of like being, slapped in the face and said, oh, okay. And there's a point at, to me, it's rather than, acting like children, they're acting like a abused spouse. And at some point, the abused spouse is going to say,
I'm out.
I'm leaving.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of, in those situations, it's a difficult process for that person to go through. And it's similarly.
Well, that's what I'm glad you brought this up, because I am curious on how do you think Europe is going to deal with the contempt, the seething, utter, overt, outright emancipatory contempt in that document towards Europe. I mean, they're talking about cultural erasure. He's making the
civilizational erasure.
Saying that they're weak, they're decaying. I mean, like, he is spared no criticism of Europe in this. How do you think they're going to respond to it? I mean, is this the stepwife that decides? Is this Tina who, claws at Ike in the limo? Or are they going to take this abuse and continue?
I don't think they are going to take the abuse, and apparently Mertz did a sort of like a television talking to the public sort of television show. I don't know what the word for that is, but like a vox pop type sort of thing. The other day, where he sort of expressed a little bit more spine, a little bit more independence. A lot of the commentary is also just saying, well, this is so outrageously wrong that, but we do need to sort of deal with it. So I think part of the way in which they're going to deal with it is just say, well, if you actually believe this, you're a complete idiot, United States and America. And if you, and there's also quite a degree of reaction to the sort of the sort of dog whistle racism of it all too. It's basically that sort of replacement theory. It's almost quite explicitly so. They say, I think I've got if present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable. And they talk about some of these countries becoming majority non-European, whatever that means. I guess we know what it means. So I think there's going to be a pretty strong reaction to that. But I also suspect it may not be from the current crop of leaders as the next in line, if you like. So
I see.
The next generation of European leaders, the ones who are going to succeed Macron, and I don't mean like the AFD or Marine Le Pen or whatever, but because I just think those, a lot of people think somehow or other the AFD is going to save Germany, and they're just utterly deluded. But the next sort of wave of political leaders who will come in 5 to 10 years will have seared into their political experience that the United States is utterly contemptuous, utterly untrustworthy, and Europe should, go about pursuing a far more independent economic, political, defence, sort of security, foreign policy as well.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of experience that will have long-term consequences for both the attitudes and the sort of general orientation of people. So in some ways it might have a kind of a counterproductive effect of pushing Europe into a far more independent approach. So yeah, that's what I think.
There's an irony in that document also. I mean, that's assuming that the document is even a legit, that this is actionable. That's assuming it's actionable. This notion of wanting a stronger Europe means that by definition, you're losing control of Europe, which was the entire point of NATO. Like it's almost as if the document assumes that it can have both, that Europeans can be stronger, they can be more independent, etc. And yet we somehow maintain some level of control behind the scenes. I mean, because there's this really good clip by right here. Is this it? No, there's this really good clip by this admiral for NATO, and he points out right here, this one, national. What is this gentleman's name? You may have seen this clip. I'm going to play it for the audience, though. Come on. Okay, the clip doesn't necessarily want to show up. Damn it, Twitter. Let's try to reload this.
I mean, while it's loading, Jamal, I should also mention that, there's just some basic factual things that people should get straight about some of these comments about Europe as well. So that, it's talking about their migration policies. Let's play the clip. Yep. And I'll come back to that after you play the clip. Yeah.
Okay.
And so when we look at the rise of the Chinese military, what our goal in the joint force is to create multiple simultaneous dilemmas for all of the adversaries around the world, so that they are very cautious and concerned about doing something that would bring any sense of threat to the American people.
Now, this is a bit rich on so many counts, but from his point of view, well, we may be pulling back on some level, in a sense of, let's say, direct engagement, this kind of Wolfowitz, where we can put American troops everywhere around the globe. But if we can push South Korea, Japan, Philippines, if we can push the Europeans in order to take a stronger stance towards Russia, we can push Israel to go after the Iranians or whatever other actors in the region we don't particularly like. And we will stand back and we will give assistance. So we want to have multiple prongs of threats, which is effectively what the document does say, right? Where it's like we want our allies to get more involved. There's a contradiction, though, for the European theater. If indeed you're pissing off Europe in this way, you're bashing them relentlessly, and you want them to be stronger, that seems that you would think mean less control. But correct me if I'm wrong on that, or do you see it that way?
Well, I think this is where the political, the sort of transatlantic political network, the political infiltration over decades sort of comes in, because they do have de facto imperial control of the political elites, of the military networks, of the security community. People talk about the security community, the intelligence services. And there's this great analyst, Nell Bonilla, who talks about the America having she describes it as a pointillistic, as in like a starry sky of points of light, empire of bases, and that it's conducting this strategy, a global strategy of, if you like, almost like permanent low-intensity war across the world, a permanent attrition war. And when pressure mounts in one area, they push the button somewhere else. And we can see that situation where, pressure's mounted on Venezuela while it's been perhaps relieved on Taiwan. Pressures gets pushed in the Caucasus sometimes, and in Ukraine sometimes, and the Koreas sometimes, and all the rest of it. So I do think he's actually articulating the sort of basic NATO strategy, which is the American strategy of this sort of permanent attrition war. But ultimately, this is it's a impossible goal that they're pursuing. I mean, the national security strategy effectively is just re-expressing in different rhetoric the continued global domination of the world by the United States. The way they make it sound a little bit more, less, or a little bit more America first, if you like, to please those people who like that, is by saying that, the phrase they use is the US will not accept the rise of any power that can threaten its interests, and that it has interests all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is absolutely pursuing a very, very, very domineering sort of strategy, which I just don't know how much longer Europe's leaders can, intelligently and in their own interests really continue to play along with that in the longer term. And certainly some of the people in Europe probably think, let's just wait a couple of years. Trump's on his way out probably.
Yeah.
In a year's time, he'll be a lame duck. Which he probably will be a lame duck, except he'll probably be this sort of, like headless chook sort of lame duck.
Assuming they don't get Vance.
Hey?
Assuming they don't get JD Vance.
Yeah, well, yeah, and people are not very happy about that. But I mean, I can't. If Trump goes down, I frankly can't see Vance replacing. Getting successfly replacing him, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you? So some people just want to wait him out. But I'm also hearing quite a few people across Europe sort of say, it doesn't matter who gets elected there. We've got to actually sort of start to stand up for our own interests. So it's not going to happen in immediately, and they're going to have to get through the Ukraine war. But if they, again, if we look at how the negotiations have gone on the Ukraine war, Europe has been getting its way in many ways, hasn't it? Trump will make a lot of noise, but in the end, he does actually have to negotiate seriously with Europe. And if America does pull out, if there is an agreement, if this sort of thing is gone, I do wonder if that starts to sort of refocus some of the Europeans about just, fixing the incredible mess that they're about to inherit in Ukraine. But also perhaps, move towards a more viable security arrangement with Russia without the constant aggravation from America. I mean, that's my more optimistic angle, but yeah.
I suppose we will see. What time is it? Okay, we have a few minutes. You mentioned, is that right? Oh, good, we have time. You mentioned that events are about to take place very soon that you think are going to be significant in relation to, I guess, some kind of deal that is going to be put forward. I got to be honest with you. I don't think the Russians care. I don't know why they would care, to be honest. If you look at events that Siversk has just fallen, Vokros has just fallen, Vochansk has just fallen. All of these places are falling back to back to back to back. The speed of the Russian advance is increasing. The only reason that the Trump administration is even having these dead letter deals is because they recognize, oh my God, the Ukrainian military is going to collapse, and it will be completely humiliating if it collapses on my watch. So whatever deals that the Europeans are talking to themselves. There's in the book Three Body, there's this element where Earth is talking to itself, saying, hey, this is what they want. This is what these people are believing. This is and all of it was wrong. All of it
Yeah.
was wrong. And that's what it makes me think of, right? When I think of the Europeans and Americans talking to each other, I always think of that scene in the book because they do it over and over and over again. And they just talk to themselves, and then they go to the Russians, and Russia's like, this is obviously unacceptable. I don't even know why you brought this to us. What do you think is going to take place, though?
Well, there has been a proposal sent to the US yesterday, apparently, and there's a proposal to meet on Saturday with EU and Trump and stuff.
I thought it was potential. Trump said
there's a planned meting.
Okay.
And I think Trump is. I mean, it seems to me that Trump, wants to deal before Christmas. First of all, he tried, before
Thanksgiving,
July or something, and then Thanksgiving. Now he's going for Christmas. But apparently, in Le Monde, the French newspaper, the advisor Podolyak. I can't quite remember what his role in the Ukrainian government is, but he said there's been an agreement to withdraw Ukraine forces from Donbass, and that this is the nature of the proposal. And the Europeans have agreed to this. So there is a significant move, but I would be pretty cautious about whether it's a bit of a bait and switch kind of thing. It's sort of, I will do this, but it will be so complicated, and in a way it's also just a way to bring in European and American peacekeeping forces to monitor the sort of withdrawal of the troops. But I agree. But I think the dilemma for Russia is the way they're currently doing the negotiation processes, very dependent on the US, and they have to keep the US sort of on the hook somehow, so that they can't just say, "Go away, Donald." We'll just keep fighting. So I wonder whether there might be some sort of positive news, but the detail of what they're talking about sounds to me not all that different, a little bit modified, but not all that different from the initial 28-point peace plan.
Right.
And it does seem to reflect very much, particularly US perspectives. It's more. I mean, they've sort of taken out some of the EU stuff, but it largely reflects the same sort of Witkoffy sort of US. Let's do a deal with the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, and all these wonderful new deals that America and Russia can do. So I think it might be a bit of a lure for Russia to agree to something, but I don't know if it's necessarily a very wise thing for them to do. But then if they do say no, they're going to have to, I guess, manage the response of the Americans. And so
dead letter.
Yeah.
Dead
I
letter.
agree. Yeah.
Dead
So
letter.
this is where I really think, and maybe I don't know whether this is their calculations. Maybe they're just going to have to say, well, Donald, you're going to have to learn from this that you're going to have to start doing things differently, because if you keep coming up with unacceptable proposals, we will continue to push ahead. And how firm is the political authority now within Ukraine after the loss of Siversk and the diplomatic retreats, the democratic sort of deficit, all the other problems. I really think there's more possibility of a really, really difficult winter for Ukraine coming ahead, which will be very embarrassing for the US. But it will also be hard, I think, for Russia to manage diplomatically. I mean, it's not. I mean, they can just push their troops through, but that's if they're pushing their troops through a social and humanitarian disaster, it could be quite difficult for them to manage diplomatically, I would think. So I think it's quite a delicate strategic calculus, perhaps, for them about what the benefits of military gains versus political gains versus diplomatic gains, and it might just be a thing of, well, let's just keep the talks rolling, but let's not rush it, and let's keep the Americans on the hook, help the Americans bring the Europeans and the Ukrainians, to their senses, but not agree to anything prematurely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would think of it differently. I think it's the Americans that are trying to keep the Russians on the hook. I mean, I think the Russians want a deal, but it can't be like Minsk 1 and 2. It can't be another Istanbul agreements. And meaning they burn all credibility. And honestly, the Europeans have no credibility in this process. I don't even know why the Russians would even care about what they think at this point. I think Lavrov has even said as much. So it's like, it's yes, ostensibly they would want a deal, but the tanks are going to keep rolling. The military operation is going to keep rolling. They're going to want every I dotted, every T crossed, and those things are going to keep going as it takes place because it allows pressure and more pressure. Keep in mind, from the Russian point of view, the only reason they're sitting in negotiations right now is because of what is happening on the battlefield. What's the context of the ground is shaping the negotiations. They're not going to change it. I don't think they're going to change it. And so, it may be humanitarian morass, but that's.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing is, what happens if there is a real, like a serious political crisis in Ukraine, and the government actually collapse, or if there really is a significant military collapse, it will create sort of a dynamic instability. I agree. I just think, it's just going to be tricky to see how it sort of plays out. But tough.
It will be a mess.
It's going to be a tragic mess.
Man. Always appreciate your conversations. Always appreciate you. I would say it's already a catastrophe, but it can get worse. It can always get worse. Dr. Jeff Rich, he's a historian, author, retired government official from Melbourne, Australia. He has a PhD in history with over 30 years of experience in government. He created the Burning Archive YouTube channel and Substack, where he shares commentaries, book reviews, and interviews on world history, culture, and politics. He has written 4 books, including 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. Jeff, you have a great rest of your night, man. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Jamal, and thanks to everyone. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye. Be safe. All right. I see my man in the background, the one, the only, Caleb Maupin. How you doing, Caleb?
How you doing?
You doing okay? I am doing okay. You having a good morning so far?
Good. Me too.
Good. Well, no, it's morning for you. It's evening for me. It's like it's nighttime for me. I was just checking on you, making sure everything was good. Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. Caleb is director for CPI, Center for Political Innovation. They are very busy as opposed to some of these other, let's say, less active, quote unquote, organizations. Caleb, thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
I guess the first thing I have to hit is this oil piracy, which seems to be outrageous. You have U.S. troops rappelling off of helicopters onto the boat of a ship. I believe it was an Iranian ship, if I'm not mistaken. This is outrageous. Like, why do you think up to this point Trump hasn't, let's say, launched his military? I mean, the military has been sitting in the Caribbean for over a month, just spinning their wheels. Do you think that there is, regardless of all the bluster, that there is this awareness somewhere in the administration, whether it's from the military itself or whether it's from people around him, saying this is a horrible idea, there is no win to this, this is a trap, meaning this is a fail, there's no way for you to look good in this process?
Well, it looks to me, I must say, and I don't want to jinx it, as they say, right? But I feel like if they were going to invade, they would have done it by now. I mean, it's been
Yeah.
since August. They've been playing these games. They've sunk how many ships, and they've been engaging in so many provocations. I feel like they're trying to do everything short of actually attacking or invading Venezuela. It looks to me like they're thinking of what else can we do, and they're kind of scraping the barrel for different things to do at this point. But I mean, this is just an act of theft. There's no justification for this. It's not legal. I mean, Venezuela is an oil producing country. And if they're exporting their oil and then you just, send the U.S. Navy to seize it, that's called theft. I mean, this has been done before. I believe the Biden administration did a similar thing with seizing one of their oil tankers. I think Trump did some similar things before, but it's theft. I mean, it's just that plain and simple. And that there's this argument that we hear from the United States, basically, that if we have sanctions on somebody and we therefore are allowed to stop financial transactions they have with somebody else. I don't know how that legally stands up, but they claim basically, if we put sanctions on one person and we then can stop them trading from somebody else. No, you can't. No, you can't. That's not how that works. Sanctions are about your own business transactions, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it's very weird, very strange. There would not be consequences for it. I mean, I often get into arguments with people saying about international law. And my argument was always, there is no such thing as international law. And when stuff like this happens, it's things like this that I point to. If there is international law, what are the consequences for the United States doing this? There are none. Might makes right. Or do you disagree with me on this?
No, I don't disagree with you. Don't disagree with you at all. And that's the same people always screaming about a rules-based global order. And it's like when the talking points change every so often, right? They get a new talking point, the rules-based global order or international law or international human rights or duty to protect. And they have all these like things. But at the end of the day, and then the USA just seizes an oil tanker and just says, nope, it's ours. We don't like Maduro, so whatever. Or the USA invades Iraq. And what was the legal basis for that? Well, it was that Iraq had rejected a UN inspection team that had been engaging in illegal activities and provocations. And so based on that, the USA said they had the right to unilaterally invade a country after the United Nations Security Council told them not to. I mean, and then when there's a U.S. military intervention, often they say, well, we have to just enforce international law. And it's just like the USA violates international law all the time. I used to work for Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. And he was a huge critic of the International Criminal Court. And he said, look, if there had been any talk of an International Criminal Court, the UN would never have been formed. All the countries would have rejected it because it would have been seen as a potential threat to their sovereignty. And that's one place where Ramsey Clark, who's from the left, I mean, he was the U.S. Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson. And he was from the left, a civil rights activist. He ended up becoming, an anti-imperialist, basically a communist after he left the Johnson administration. And but that's one thing he agreed with Republicans on pretty solidly, was that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is completely illegal and illegitimate. It has absolutely no legal basis. The idea of you could set up a court in The Hague that has jurisdiction for the entire world is absurd. And one thing that is not widely pointed out, so the ICC, the International Criminal Court, it was George Soros, who was one of the main people pushing it. And there was first the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia, and that was part of dismantling, former Yugoslavia. But that wasn't the ICC. The ICC had not been set up yet. Now that the ICC has been set up, every single person ever convicted in it is African. And that is one aspect of the ICC that you look at it is just so blatantly a colonial institution. Through which, the European powers can declare somebody on the African continent to be committing genocide or crimes against humanity and arrest them. I mean, it is a really blatantly colonial institution, and it has absolutely no legal basis. There is absolutely no legal basis for the International Criminal Court. And so we talk about international law. I mean, there are treaties that have been signed, et cetera, but it's all very much a matter of who can get away with what and what the balance of forces are at any given time, unfortunately.
Absolutely. This is, and by the way, this was Donald Trump responding about the seizure of the tanker. Listen to what he says here. I mean, he's all over the map in regards to this explanation.
Drugs, or is it now also about oil?
Well, it's about a lot of things, but one of the things it's about is the fact that they've allowed millions of people to come into our country from their prisons, from gangs, from drug dealers, and from mental institutions, probably proportionately more than anybody else. They came in from many countries. We're getting them out. We had 11,888 murderers come into our country. Many of them are from Venezuela. We had thousands of Tren de Aragua, the gang, come in from, which they say is the most violent gang. I don't know, MS-13 is pretty bad, but Tren de Aragua, they say, is the most violent gang that comes from the prisons of Venezuela. It came out of the prisons of Venezuela. So it has to do with a lot of things. They've treated us badly, and I guess now we're not treating them so good. If you look at the drug traffic by sea is down 92%. And nobody can figure out who the 8% is, because I have no idea. Anybody getting involved in that right now is not doing well. And we'll start that on land too. It's going to be starting on land pretty soon. Thank you.
That's outrageous. Like, outrageous. Give me your take on this.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I've heard claims that this Tren de Aragua doesn't really exist.
It doesn't exist. It's a CIA cutout.
Yeah. It is a gang that existed like decades ago that doesn't exist, and that like the basis for some of the people being accused of being in it is they're from Aragua, right, which is a region in Venezuela. And so it's like, well, then, Aragua, Tren de Aragua, and it's just crazy things like that. And then they're using the cartel of the Suns, and I've seen Max Blumenthal's work, showing that that's not illegal. That's a ridiculous thing, and that was a group that worked with the CIA years ago. And also this thing about all these Venezuelans that came here, I do have some questions about that. Because first of all, like, I mean, they're from Venezuelan prisons, right? So these are not Maduro's supporters, right? It's not, I mean, if Maduro has you in prison, they're not like Maduro's, biggest, supporters, are not the people in the prisons, number one.
Mm-hmm.
But number two, who let them in, right? And that's, I feel like, there is this policy in the United States. I believe we have laws that if you're coming from a quote unquote communist dictatorship, they'll let you into the country. So like, there were a lot of things that just didn't add up about, like, in the lead up to the 2024 elections, there were these Venezuelans that were coming into the United States that would do really outrageous things that would get a lot of media attention, that would make people really mad at migrants and immigrants, right? And so what was going on? I mean, it was almost like they were letting in some very nasty Venezuelans and then putting them places where they would do really nasty things and publicizing it. And then somehow we're to blame that on Maduro. Why are we blaming that on Maduro? I mean, these are people Maduro didn't like. These are people that were in Maduro's prison. So and then why are we letting them in? Like, there's a lot of questions there. Something was going on where these kind of these Venezuelans would be put up in a hotel someplace, and they would, punch old ladies and, steal candy from babies, and just do awful things. And then the media would say, oh, look at these awful migrants, and now we're supposed to be attacking them because Maduro sent them here. Like, well, that's not how it works. I mean, he doesn't just send people here. The USA has to take them in, and something was off. Do you remember that whole thing about like the Venezuelan migrants in all these big cities? And it was like they would do very, very bizarre and very, very public bad things, right? It was very weird.
Well, from my understanding, the Biden administration, the whole Venezuela thing was weird, especially in the Biden administration where they were letting people in because oftentimes they didn't know who was coming in. Mm-hmm. We don't have a trade. We don't have let's say a treaty with Venezuela in this case.
Right.
So, and we don't have a relationship with Venezuela in this case. So there was no way to know who Joe Biden is effectively letting into the country. It wasn't just Venezuela. It was a few countries like this. And of course, Joe Biden came up with the scheme of, it's like you sign into an app. And then once you do, it was very strange in the way that this was effectively working. By the same token, under U.S. law, if you are fleeing what you consider to be political persecution, you can get grandfathered into the country.
Right.
So I don't know. He seems to be leaning on this idea. I don't believe for a moment that they open up Venezuelan jails and let people into the United States. I don't buy that at all, any more than I buy drug traffic over the seas is down 92% any more than I buy the Trump economy as the greatest economy in the history of America. You know, not all of the stuff. We've made $20 trillion in investments into America. None of this stuff is true.
Okay.
At least that's my take. I mean, you can tell me if you think I'm wrong.
No, I don't
It's
think
just-
you're wrong.
Yeah, it's just the it's just my take on it. But yeah, he's living off this, and he's living off this in a way where he's trying to effectively use this as a justification for, I guess, policy. But you might be right. He hasn't necessarily taken the step of going after, let's say, kinetic military action yet, which, fingers crossed. I just don't know how he backs away from it at this point. You mentioned something about Ramsey Clark, about the ICC.
Mhm.
Donald Trump, an article just came out, I think this was yesterday, that Donald Trump is demanding that the ICC rewrite their rules to effectively protect that same Donald Trump. And you can imagine why. Trump has been murdering people in the Caribbean willy-nilly, like there's just mass murder. And so if the ICC actually looks at this and says, well, hey, the U.S., Trump specifically, Hegseth, has a policy of mass murder in the Caribbean, maybe we want to go after the U.S. president. Now, I don't buy that they would have the balls to do this. By the same token, though, Trump apparently is concerned and is demanding that they effectively rewrite the rules to shield his administration, which is astonishing. And right here, just to nail down the story, Washington's preparing or is pressuring the International Criminal Court to amend its founding statute to block any future attempts to prosecute U.S. President Donald Trump or his single officials, Reuters reported, citing administration sources. That's amazing.
Well, it's not just, I mean, that's nothing new, though. I mean, there's the Hague Act, which was passed by Congress, that the USA actually has the right to invade the Hague if
Yeah,
they
Bush
ever
administration.
prosecute an American. The USA has never kind of given it any legitimacy. And that there's an element with the ICC that, as much as it is very much a colonial institution, it's also something that the European powers are pushing, and a lot of the United States, especially Republicans, don't like. The Bush administration didn't seem to like the ICC. And that, I mean, the Democrats seem to be a bit more favorable towards it. And it's the British, it's the French, the Germans, the Belgians, I mean, it's the European mainland powers that seem to be behind it. And there's an element of the American, state that has always felt it was illegitimate and didn't trust it. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. I have spent a long time investigating kind of the rivalry between various imperial powers. Like, you remember freedom fries. Remember freedom
Yes.
fries, right? When we hated the French, right? And that was a big part of being a good American patriot who supported the invasion of Iraq, is you had to hate the French. And that there's a lot of weird things that have gone on. For example, the French government is a huge supporter of nuclear power. And so much so that the French government, their nuclear power industry is government run. The founder of it, the physicist who started the French nuclear power industry, was a communist party member. And France not only has nuclear power, but they export nuclear power. And Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, early 80s, he was setting up a nuclear power facility. And the French government sent scientists there, and they were helping Saddam Hussein to develop nuclear power. And then Israel bombed Iraq and killed not only a bunch of Iraqi scientists, but actually a French citizen when France was working with Saddam Hussein to develop peaceful nuclear energy. And on top of that, Greenpeace is this like environmental activist group that is against nuclear power and is against big oil. And I believe in the 1980s, the French government and French intelligence blew up a ship of Greenpeace activists that were working against French interests. And later, it's confirmed it was like a hit done by the French government. And that there, an inter-imperialist rivalry between, France and the United States. There's a long-standing trend there. And one thing that I have done a lot of investigation of, and this is a big part of my book about the years of lead, I even wrote an appendix about it, is that it seems that the French government has gone out of its way to recruit a lot of leftists around the world as assets, right? French intelligence, as the Soviet Union was losing its influence in the late 80s, French intelligence seemed to have, picked up and recruited a number of leftists to be assets. One example, for example, this is very interesting, is the case of Mumia Abu Jamal. Do you know Mumia Abu Jamal? Right. Yeah, I believe Mumia Abu Jamal is innocent, a former Black Panther who was accused of killing a police officer and is in prison today. And they tried to give him the death penalty in 1995. Well, the French government seems to have been the primary force behind trying and ultimately successfully preventing Mumia's execution. Because the French government is committed to abolishing the death penalty. There are streets in Paris named after Mumia Abu Jamal. Mumia has been declared a French citizen by the French government. And it seems like France was the main force trying to prevent the execution and ultimately was successful in doing so. And it's particularly fascinating. The other thing is the French government in the 80s, they launched a policy of allowing communists from around the world that were fleeing government persecution or criminal charges to move to France. And there are hundreds of former members of the Italian Red Brigades, which was the terrorist group in Italy, the communist terrorist group. Hundreds of them moved to France and lived there and still live there and have complete immunity. They're not being extradited and all of that. That's very, very interesting. There's also an interesting case of, have you ever heard of the unicorn killer, Ira Einhorn?
No.
Okay, so in Philadelphia, there was this well-known hippie leftist environmental activist named Ira Einhorn, and his girlfriend went missing, and his apartment was smelling really, really bad. And so the police searched his apartment, and they found his girlfriend there mummified. He had killed his girlfriend, allegedly. So the guy, was charged with murder, and he was really well connected, and members of city council and other prominent people said, give him bail. He got bail, and then he disappeared. And his bail was paid for by, I believe, the Brofman family, which is one of like the very, very wealthy families in Canada, like that owns, a liquor company or something like that. And he was missing for decades, Ira Einhorn. For decades, no one knew where he was. And finally, in the early 2000s, they found him in France. He was living in France under a different name. And then the French government put up a fight like crazy to prevent him from being extradited back to the United States. The state of Pennsylvania basically had to pass a special law that said if someone is charged with murder, flees the United States, moves to France, Pennsylvania will not give them the death penalty. And on that basis, the French government finally had to give in when they passed a special law and extradite him to the United States. Right? It was the most bizarre case ever, right? Where the French government did everything they could to keep Ira Einhorn in France. And he was living there under a false name, and he had all kinds of connections. The other thing that's weird is when Ira Einhorn came back to the United States, his defense was, I didn't kill my girlfriend, the CIA did. I don't think he was necessarily telling the truth there, but he then he read into the record all kinds of information about MK Ultra and all kinds of stuff. And it looks like the reason he was rushed out of the country and had like the Brofman family and all these prominent Democrats, help him get bail and all of that was he did have some kind of intelligence connection. He wasn't just a guy. Right. And he was the guy who had been the MC at the Earth Day celebrations when Earth Day. He was widely described as the guy who invented the holiday of Earth Day. And he was this very, very prominent counterculture hippie. And he was rushed out of the United States and harbored by the French government for many, many decades. And they put up a fight like crazy to prevent his extradition. I mean, it took 10 years at least for the U.S. government to finally get him from France. And that the French government, it appears that as the Soviet Union was losing influence, a lot of leftist and communist groups started to become assets of French intelligence. And I think that explains why now that the USA and France are unified against Russia, a lot of the left is completely impotent. They're not standing with, it's that they became assets. And I wrote this, and I wrote another piece about this. And a number of people came to me and they said, you don't know how right you are. Apparently in Russia, when the special military operation got going in 2022, almost like all the Trotskyite communists in Russia got on a plane and went to Paris.
Are you serious?
I am serious. And I didn't even know that at the time that I wrote about this. You know, and the other thing was that, I mean, you know, I mean, I knew for a fact that a lot of the money for the Mumia case came from France, right? And that I knew a lot of the communist groups in America, they would just go to France and fundraise like crazy for the Mumia case. And that France was against the US invasion of Iraq. And you remember like Michael Moore, you know, when he did Fahrenheit 9/11, they gave him the
Right.
Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. And they made it like France was really, really pushing Fahrenheit 9/11. And Harold Pinter, the playwright, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and he made a big point of like giving a long speech against George W. Bush when he won the Nobel Prize. And then the French government like gave him the Legion d'Honneur or whatever. And that it was clear that the French and the US government, they weren't getting along. And that France had kind of turned a lot of leftist activists around the world into assets. I mean, people don't realize this, but in France, the French Communist Party is like part of the government. They are, and they're a legal political party that has, you know, a huge amount of seats in the French government, and but they're not communists. They cut ties with the Soviet Union in 1978. They're basically like Bernie Sanders kind of social democrats. They just had the legacy of being La Resistance and fighting Hitler, you know, and being, you know, the Communist Party at one time. And they're probably very much overrepresented in the French intelligence services because the, you know, communist activist kind of people are involved in civil society, feminism, LGBT, you know, and that the French Communist Party is a very important part of the French deep state and its activities around the world. And it's all very, very interesting. The fact that we saw the wave of anti-colonial uprisings and that in, you know, the Union of Sahel states that has come into existence now with Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger, that was very much because France was so solidly part of the anti-Russia campaign. You know, these former French colonies that were still like dominated economically and militarily by France. That's why we saw them move ahead and with Russian support assert their independence. And, you know, Ibrahim Traore, this great African leader, I mean, he's just doing amazing things in Burkina Faso. It's very much a result of the fact that France was all on board with the war against Russia. And so Russia, as a supporter of anti-colonialism, you know, they very much supported, you know, moves against France. It's very interesting. French imperialism and U.S. imperialism are not on the same page. The British and the Americans, they dominate the international oil markets, right? Oil, that's oil banking. That's the Atlanticist, British Empire, American economic order. The French have liked nuclear power because they don't want to be dependent on American and British oil, right? BP and ExxonMobil and Shell. I mean, the oil markets are dominated by the British and the Americans. The French have been some big supporters of nuclear power. And that has been a kind of a defining difference between them. And the military industrial complex in America also likes nuclear power, right? And that big oil tends to be liberal, but also kind of globalist in its orientation. It's interesting to see how these things play out. You know, at the end of the day, World War I and World War II, the root cause of both conflicts was that the British and the Americans wanted to maintain dominance over the European mainland, right? And Germany was an up-and-coming imperialist power at the time of World War I. And they wanted to be colonizers and imperialists as well, right? The British, the American, and the French were ahead of them in the game, and so Germany was up and coming. After World War I, Germany was stripped of its colonies, and then, you know, with Hitler, they started re-seizing their colonies and reasserting themselves as an imperialist power. And so you had World War II, and that rivalry between the European mainland and the British and the American, like Atlanticist sea power. That is kind of the defining division in the Western countries. We have this notion since the Cold War of the so-called collective West, but we're not collective, right? And I think the people on the European mainland are a bit different than America and Britain. And that the new right that we're seeing rising in Europe, that seems to be the issue there. They're not socialists or communists. They're on the right. They're not Nazis either. They're the European mainland. They're saying, look, we're British, or we're French, we're German, we're Belgian, and we don't feel a need for our country to be economically tied in and dominated by the projects of America. And, you know, we'd like to have our own independence. And the fact that Biden blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, I mean, that wasn't just an attack on Russia. That was an attack on Germany, telling them they can't import natural gas from Russia, which is right next to them. They need to import natural gas from the other side of the world. Well, that's an attack on their sovereignty. I mean, the Germans should be able to buy natural gas from whoever they want. And it does, economically speaking, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to import natural gas from the other side of the planet when Russia is right there. But I guess they have to, because they've been kind of press ganged, forced into the U.S. British anti-Russian crusade. And it's all very interesting.
They don't seem to be press gang. Merritt seems to be willingly singing a tune as he joins into this.
But there's a lot of Germans who don't agree. I mean, there's a lot of Germans who would prefer Germany work in its own economic interest, and they're not allowed in the political process, right? I mean, and that's what the AfD is really about. The AfD are not Nazis. I mean, maybe there's some fringe elements that are, but for the most part, the AfD party in Germany is just Germans who say, no, European Union, NATO, this isn't good for Germany. And there's a lot of French people that support, the National Front and Marine Le Pen, because the same kind of thing, right? It's just kind of like, and they're thinking in terms of our national interest, we're not benefiting from this kind of globalism that ends up being dominated by the United States and Britain.
What do you make of, I don't think I had the opportunity to talk to you about the national security strategy. I don't think it was out the last time you were on the show. What do you make of that document? I mean, I guess there are a few questions on it, but let's start at the beginning. What do you make of the flat document in and of itself, beyond whether or not the document is actionable, beyond whether or not it's would be accepted by, let's say, the blob, or the president has the power to do anything to effectuate any of that stuff that's in the document per se?
Well, I like it. I mean, I like it. I like the language of it. I like the idea that, undermining the logic of NATO and all of that. I will say, I just put it, unfortunately, I'm starting to get a little bit jaded, because Trump has said many, many good things when it comes to Russia, but he hasn't done it, and it's like, so we got this peace deal. I mean, Congress just passed all this money for Ukraine in the National Defense Authorization Act. Well, if the war is going to end, why did we just give Ukraine $200 billion or whatever? Like, something's, I keep hearing Trump say really good things, and I see Kirill Dmitriev coming over here, and I hear all this hope and all this, but then it doesn't happen, and so I like what I'm hearing. I think it's great what was said in the national security strategy, and I'm sure the Europeans feel very dissed by it and are very upset about it, and that's all well and good. But I'd like to see that the war actually end. Like I'd like to see actual concrete action, and that the performative stuff only goes so far, and that Trump has done a lot of that. There's been a huge amount of performative measures when it comes to opposing NATO, when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine. Let's actually see it happen, right? I mean, it seems like now there is a deal on the table that is realistic, but it's taken some time here. I mean, it's been how long? I mean, so let's see.
But this deal isn't really realistic. I mean, the idea that Russia is going to give up hundreds of billions of dollars and give the U.S. a kickback is outrageous. Like, the fact that's even in the document on some level gets across. It's not being serious.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to be excited, but I just keep getting excited over these little statements that are made, gestures, diplomatic words. And it's like, okay, we've heard optimistic, hopeful diplomatic words for about a year, but it doesn't actually happen. So let's either see it happen or not, and I'm getting tired of the performance. And to some degree or other, I mean, it says to me that it looks to me like, to some degree or other, Trump isn't really running things. And that's kind of what everyone was saying about Biden. Who's really running the country? Well, it looks like Trump is not really running the country either. There are other forces there that are entrenched and powerful that have the ability to nullify things. And yeah, I mean, it's not good.
Or Trump was never being serious. I mean, like, it's one thing, like, one or two things is true. Either because Trump could have always walked. And I suspect that the controlling factor for Trump in walking is, okay, well, he doesn't want to get blamed for Ukraine losing the war. And so then you get a lot of performative stuff. And the problem that Trump has now is that Siversk has fallen, Vochansk has fallen, Pokrovsk has fallen, Leningrad is surrounded with mop-up operations. At some point, Russia will take Donbass. And this is like the last stronghold that Ukraine has, in which case the Ukrainian military is effectively collapsing. Okay, that's humiliating. Like, if you're a U.S. president and this collapses on your watch, that is deeply humiliating. And so now you have all of these deals that are coming up with the idea of Donald Trump either trying to not look bad, but there's a question about whether or not he can accept Russian terms. I don't know if he could. I mean, like, for example, you mentioned a thing for Congress. Just because Trump may want a deal on his terms doesn't mean Congress wants a deal, in which case this is kind of a thumb in the eye of the president by them passing the National Defense Authorization Act, where they're giving, I thought it was like 500 million or 200 million, whatever that number is, but several $100 million to Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, I for a while now, I have, I did not believe that Trump had the courage of his convictions. I didn't see him as a strong president. I saw him as a weak president that was pushed to and fro by either the people around him, by the media, etc. Like, he may have these theatrical moments, but for all intents and purposes, if he's overly concerned about walking and putting it into this thing, then he is not the tough guy that I think people think he is. But give me your take on those.
Yeah, well, I think the most important constituency in America right now is what you call dissident MAGA, which is people that are Tucker Carlson fans, Marjorie Taylor Greene fans, Thomas Massey fans, that believed in America first and are angry that Trump is not carrying it out. And what shocks me, and I think this is just a result of the fact that we're in the information age, is how open-minded that crowd of people is. Right, those people tend to come from the right, but at this point, they are angry at the American political establishment. They voted for Trump because they wanted to end the wars. They don't trust the wars. They don't trust the FBI. They see our freedoms being taken away. And they're willing to hear narratives that generally people on the right would just completely dismiss. I mean, a great example would be Tucker Carlson embracing the Uhuru movement, right? The African People's Socialist Party. This is a Marxist Black revolutionary organization. That's the kind of person that, Tucker Carlson would just completely not pay attention to 10, 20 years ago. But Tucker Carlson, as dissident MAGA, did a huge amount to raise awareness about their case on Fox News and then later on his own podcast. And that was amazing, right? And that the dissident MAGA crowd are really, really important, and I think that is who we need to be figuring out how to talk to, right? The left is the left, and the left has really deteriorated in the last decade. And I've watched the left just completely, there's not much anti-establishment sentiment on the left. The cancel culture, the left has just deteriorated, and that there's a lot of MAGA that are just blindly supporting Trump. But there's a large constituency of people I'm calling dissident MAGA, and they are very, very important. And what does dissident MAGA do? And I think people need to pay attention to them. My concerns, I feel like Marjorie Taylor Greene, to some degree or other, the reason that I think she stepped down and she's leaving Congress in January is because she realized that she was falling into a trap where she was going to have to either become part of the Democratic Party's anti-Trump stuff or just fall in line and obey Trump. And she could do neither of those things, right? So to maintain her integrity, she left Congress. There's the whole thing with, the people that maintain that Charlie Kirk was killed by Israel. There's a strong case that can be made for that. I don't embrace that necessarily because I don't know. And I want to stay away from things I don't know, unless I know something for a fact. I don't want to, embrace something. But the people who make that argument, the Candace Owens crowd, they make some very, very strong arguments that the killing of Charlie Kirk came from Israel, and they strongly believe it. And that there's a large number of people in the MAGA camp who do oppose Israel and believe that Israel, purged Charlie Kirk to some degree or other. And this is really, really important. If we're trying to build a real anti-war movement in America, dissident MAGA is very, very important. And that's why I'm very disappointed with the hands-off Venezuela protests right now, because there's absolutely no effort being made to include them in it, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene opposes attacking Venezuela. Thomas Massey, Rand Paul opposes attacking Venezuela. But the hands-off Venezuela movement, I mean, there was a rally in LA and I looked at the videos. I didn't even see signs about Venezuela. The signs were all about ICE, and it's just like they're trying to fit hands-off Venezuela into Trump derangement syndrome. Whereas if you listen to the people that want to drive out Trump, they think he's not regime change oriented enough. right? And I mean, the idea that the Democratic Party is a friend of Venezuela, I mean, that's ridiculous. It was Obama who put on the crippling sanctions, but there is this misleadership. I would say the so-called left is dominated by elements that are waging a culture war against Middle America. And they are just so determined to wage that culture war, they will not, in their minds, to be a Democrat is always 1,000 times better than being a Republican, no questions asked. And in the era of Trump, that's not true necessarily. I mean, in some cases, you could argue it is, but it's not true necessarily. And that Trump, despite, not fulfilling it, Trump did position himself in a way that he appeared to be anti-establishment. And that many people voted for him because they don't trust the FBI, because they wanted to end the wars, etc. And the misleadership of the left, namely Brian Becker and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, they are just operating in a way that there is no room for such people in the left. They will not build a coalition. And then their response to the Rage Against the War Machine protests in Washington, D.C. in 2023 was absolutely horrendous. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The establishment pulled out all the stops against that protest like you wouldn't believe, because it had Chris Hedges there, because it had Dennis Kucinich, but it also had Tulsi Gabbard, and it was an attempt to build a more broad anti-war coalition. And the response to it was unbelievable from both the establishment and the so-called left. And I mean, that's the problem. We need to build a real anti-war movement that includes people from dissident MAGA, and the refusal to do that, and the idea that all the dissident MAGA are all just racist and they're just bad people. It's not that simple. It's more complicated. Yes, there are racist people in that, but people can change their views, and people may be forced to acknowledge new realities as they come to question the system. Things are more complicated than people realize, and that is one of my biggest critiques. I feel like if we had a hands-off Venezuela movement that included the MAGA, dissident MAGA elements, or even the pro-Palestine thing, the message of the pro-Palestine protests should have been money for jobs and schools for America, not weapons for Israel. And I think a lot of MAGA people would have agreed to that. But instead, it was almost like the pro-Palestine movements were being organized in a way to push MAGA people to support Israel. It was like, we hate America. America's evil and racist, just like Israel. And if you really hate America, you should hate Israel too. It was almost like they were like doing everything they could to make the rallies as unappealing to MAGA people as possible. And that's misleadership.
What do you think happened to the left? Because the left wasn't always that way. I mean, in my mind, growing up, the left was, and I don't mean Democrats, I just mean the left. And by the way, I know Brian Becker. If I'm not mistaken, I used to work with Brian Becker. I am unfamiliar with the organization. So maybe I need a little bit more clarity on this. And maybe this fits into the question that I'm about to ask on this idea of what happened to the left. Is it just that everything is reflexive? So it's no longer, we have an ideology, we have a platform, we have a belief set, etc. Instead, somewhere along the way, it became the beliefs are entirely reflexive to our opposition. In which case, if our opposition changes their point of view, then our beliefs change. So if Donald Trump takes a political positioning of, well, I want to stop wars, whether he believes it or not, then the other part becomes, we're more pro-war. We're more pro-Ukraine. We're more pro, we don't want anybody to say anything about the Gaza genocide. We don't want, we're okay with getting rid of Maduro, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think happened in this case? Because something obviously changed.
Well, I think after the fall of the Soviet Union, a process that had already been, in the works during the Cold War, which was the West hijacking leftist values and leftist sentiments to serve imperialism and to justify imperialist interventions, that escalated, because left and right were almost defined during the Cold War by your relationship to this big, huge international entity called communism. When that international entity called communism was gone, something that had already started with the neocon Trotskyites and the Congress for Cultural Freedom kind of escalated, which was the U.S. waging its interventions in the name of left-wing values, right? You know, we're bringing down a dictator, that people are fighting for freedom. We're going to liberate the women. We're going to liberate the LGBT people. We're going to spread human rights. That became the narrative that the Western imperialist countries used to carry out their interventions, right? And the George Soros kind of color revolution, you know, Revolution Incorporated activist apparatus became a really big part of U.S. foreign policy. And on top of that, I think also there's the experience of the new communist movement. I've written a lot, you know, I have this book on the new communist movement, party building in 1970s America. And that, you know, there was a layer of people that coming out of the 1960s they did the right thing. They went out of their way to try and build a mass movement among the American people against imperialism. And it didn't work, right? And they got jobs in factories with thousands and thousands of people, tried to form new communist parties and such. And the American people didn't want to hear it because the U.S. economy was still very, very strong. And there were a couple places where they did have success, like Detroit, I think, is probably the city where the new communist movement was the most successful, with the election of Coleman Young and the Wildcat Summer of 1974. But largely, the American people didn't want to hear it, right? You know, the U.S. working class was still prosperous enough in the 70s that you know, kind of, you know, becoming anti-imperialists and revolutionaries was just not something they wanted to do. And at the end of the 70s, you had a big economic downturn, and that led to the rise of Ronald Reagan and the American working class becoming more conservative and more anti-communist. So based on that experience, a lot of the people that now lead communist groups in America, they operate on the assumption that it just can't be done. Average Americans can't be won over, because we tried that in the 70s and it didn't work out well. And there's some really tragic stuff. 1979, there was an event called the Greensboro Massacre, where, you know, a group of communist activists, they had a death to the Ku Klux Klan rally, and the Klan showed up and shot 5 of them on live television. And the Klansmen were acquitted, you know, and there was a lot of cases of, you know, of these very dedicated communists trying to do the right thing. But the atmosphere politically in America was just, there was enough of a prosperous white middle class that didn't want to hear it, that you didn't have a revolutionary movement. And so now much of the communist left operates on the assumption that the masses of Americans are unrecruitable, and they just can't be won over. They're just racist. They benefit from imperialism. And then on top of that, there was so much violence directed against communists, right? In the 70s and 80s, the coming out of the 60s, the kind of people that were carrying the communist flame, they experienced so much violence at the hands of, you know, Christians and right-wing Americans that they're almost traumatized. And they see Trump, the idea that there'd be anything good about Trump or anything good about Trump's supporters is something they just can't comprehend. And I knew some of these people, and it's just, they have gotten into fistfights and they have been violently attacked. And as far it's like, this is how trauma is weaponized, right? You know, once people have experienced violence, once they know someone who's been killed, it's very, very hard to convince people to change their tactics and make an alliance or anything like that, right? There's a traumatic side to it, you know, where they know someone who's been hurt, and they just kind of have a gut level reaction. You know, back in the 1930s, the Communist Party embraced American patriotism. They said communism is nothing but 20th century Americanism. We are the party continuing the traditions of Abraham Lincoln. But these communists that come out of the 70s, they would never say that, because they just have this gut level, like, people with American flags are my enemies. You know, the people that push American patriotism want to kill me. And they have had traumatic experiences that have kind of drawn a line in blood where they just can't listen. And it's very tragic that they've been through that. And, you know, but so there's that factor, along with U.S. imperialism kind of suddenly reinventing itself to carry out its interventions in the name of leftist values, that a lot of the left they're just lost. They can't genuinely be populist or anti-imperialist, because they have this kind of cultural opposition to the American public at large, and this kind of, you know, cultural issue. And then on top of that, the imperialists themselves are hijacking the very ideas that they talked about for years, and so they're lost, you know. And you know, I think about, you know, do you remember when it was maybe 10 years ago at the Super Bowl, they had a performance that referenced the Black Panthers, like where they had Black Panther outfits or something? Do you remember this?
Maybe.
Like at the Super Bowl. right? And I, you know, at the time I was in touch with a lot of old communists, and you know, it was like the Super Bowl had this halftime show that, and you know, was kind of pro Black Panther, pro Black Lives Matter, and you know, the response of all these old communists was just to celebrate. You know, this is a huge victory, and I was saying, hold up, like you do realize the Super Bowl is like the most televised event, and like this wouldn't have happened if very, very powerful forces had not decided this could happen. No. It's just a victory for the movement. That just shows that we're ahead. And it's like, no, like, you know, and there's not a double take. It's just kind of like there's this entity that a lot of the left have gotten to the point that there is this big, scary entity called the right wing. It's called the right wing, and it is just evil and scary, and nothing can possibly be as bad as the right wing. What is the right wing? They can't tell you what it is. What do right wingers believe in? They don't know. But it's this big, scary thing, and we must fight the right wing, you know, and it's based on trauma. It's based on trauma. It's based on confusion, and they are just disoriented, right? A lot of the older folks came up in a time where the main enemy of the American government was anything left wing. That's not the way things present themselves. And now a lot of the countries that are opposing U.S. imperialism around the world do so on a kind of conservative basis, at least culturally. And so it's anything that's left wing is not de facto anti-imperialist. U.S. imperialism is not, you know, necessarily presenting itself in a right wing way, and often hijacks left wing sentiments. And leftism as a movement is just completely disoriented and confused.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. I mean, I would imagine they would probably say, well, the Cold War was effectively criminalizing communists.
Yeah.
In the way that they were going after them. So it's not like they are taking this, and this was kind of like this pro-America stance to go after communists. You know, it's like it's true blue American in order to go after a communist. Like, meaning they're not coming out of this stuff out of a vacuum per se. No, you can call it trauma, fair enough, but that trauma is real. Like that, they're not. Yeah. Caleb, man, always appreciate you, man. Sure. Always appreciate you joining me, Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. He's director for Center for Political Innovation. Caleb, please let the audience know a few of your books.
Sure. Yeah. You know, I was talking about The Danger of an American Years of Lead that I wrote about the Luigi Mangione case. You know, I've got my book Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, which has gotten a lot of very good reviews. I've been on a lot of shows about this book. It got a lot of attention. And I actually have a website, calebmaupinbooks.net. So you can look at all my books on there, audiobooks, the whole thing. But yeah, Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org is my organization. We're actually having an event in New Jersey to kick off the new year, January 11th. So I hope people register and come. It's going to be great. Garland Nixon's going to be there. There's going to be music, speeches. I'm going to be honoring 4 local New Jersey anti-imperialist activists, lifelong, you know, organizers and others. So it's going to be pretty awesome. So I hope people come to our event January 11th. And yeah, we're organizing. It's now is the time to go out with an anti-imperialist message and say that, look, our enemy is not in Venezuela. It's not in Russia or China or Iran. Our enemy is the big banks and corporations, the big monopolies that are grinding this country into poverty and trying to march us into a new world war. And we need to build a broad movement against imperialism for a new America, reborn in connection with the rising new economy in the East. That's our message, and I hope people check us out.
Caleb, do you have time to answer a chat? Because I would imagine this is the biggest pushback.
Hit me with your best shot. Bring it on.
Well, the biggest pushback that I suspect you get is around this idea of let's say a broad coalition. Yeah. So this is the chat that came up. This is why I'm bringing it to your attention, because I'm curious on your take. It says, like establishment Democrats, your idea isn't to rebuild the left, but to bring in the right to you. It doesn't affect you. So, quote, race, unquote, isn't important enough to stop a coalition. What do you think? I mean, give me a take.
Well, that's interesting, right? And that, you know, I have an interesting reaction to that. Well, first of all, right, a lot of the cultural issues that are like kind of red lines are not racial issues. They're, you know, I mean, you know, they are issues that are actually, you know, to give you a great example, the biggest cancel I've ever gotten, the biggest cancel I ever received was I tweeted out, I said, if you oppose gay marriage or you oppose abortion, I might disagree with you, but we can work together. You're still my comrade. We can work together. And I was one of these very liberal commentators. I got blasted for that. It was over 1,000 retweets of every person. And all these people said to me, well, of course a white man would say that. And I thought, there's a lot of black people that are against abortion. There's a lot of black people that are against gay marriage. And I thought, and I said, well, what about, you think all the people at these pro-Palestine rallies, all those Muslims, do you think they're in favor of abortion? You think they're in favor of gay marriage? But there's this kind of assumption that if somebody is deemed oppressed, they must agree with the left on everything. That is not true. Right. There's a lot of social conservatism in communities that are not, of color, and Trump, that are not white. And Trump actually got a huge amount of votes from people of color, right? And that I don't feel that the activist left speaks for the entire, Black community, Latin community, Arab American community, Asian, it's just that's not, but that's a common misconception, and that, the Nation of Islam, for example, Minister Farrakhan spoke pretty positively of Trump, and did the interview with Alex Jones where he didn't endorse Trump. That was a misrepresentation. He did not endorse Trump, but he seemed to have some optimism when it came to Trump, and that it's not so simple, right? And that I think, and the other thing that I've noticed is weird is that the rise of wokeism, one of the main targets, and you wouldn't know this, if you, but I mean, unless you pay attention to these things, which I know you do, and I do, but a lot of people don't, is they've targeted Black nationalists, right? There has been a huge effort to purge Black nationalists from the leadership of the Black liberation movement, calling them hoteps, right? That's the slur that they use for them, hoteps. Right. And, that Black nationalists are anti-LGBT, Black nationalists are not feminist enough, Black nationalists are crazy, they spread conspiracy theories, they're anti-vax, and that they're the woke crowd that is very much pushing anti-racism. They have targeted a lot of the Black nationalist leadership that has been in the Black community. And that's been a big push because they consider them to be too anti-imperialist. And in some cases, they just disagree with them on certain issues. And I find that to be interesting as well. Right. And that, again, there is what you can call the woke activist left. Right. They don't speak for a lot of the forces that have dominated Black liberation. I see people in the chat referencing the Black Panthers. It's easy to support the Black Panthers now, right? Because it's been decades, 50 years later, right? Yeah. But at the time the Black Panthers existed, at the time that Fred Hampton was being murdered, it was quite a difficult stance to support them. It took real courage to do so. But now, 50 years later, we can say, oh, the Black Panthers were great. Oh, it's awful what the U.S. government did, but at the time, it was very different. And the Uhuru movement, that's a great example. Now, they are not socially conservative as far as I understand it. They tend to take more liberal positions. But even when the U.S. government came for them and raided their homes, Tucker Carlson stood up for them. And even Glenn Beck did a sympathetic segment on his show. And my organization, we supported them. But the left was absent largely. That there was a lot of the left didn't support them. And those who did, it was like they put a statement out. That was it. And it's like our ability to take anti-imperialist stances was on trial. I know I'm going to be speaking on their conference, their webinar on Saturday about repealing the Foreign Agents Registration Act. They're actually having a webinar December 13th, tomorrow, about repealing the Foreign Agents Registration Act. They tried to use the Foreign Agents Registration Act to say it's illegal to question U.S. foreign policy. It's illegal to be an anti-war activist. And the left didn't do anything for them because of this cancel culture stuff. Well, they're connected to somebody on the internet that I heard was a cult or said this or that. I mean, it was really, really awful to see how the right defended the Uhuru movement, a leftist group, more than the so-called left did. But it's because they're anti-imperialist, because they took anti-imperialist stances, and that a lot of the left has just kind of become controlled. The foundation money, right? That's a big factor too, that a lot of leftist groups, They get foundation money. If the group itself is not funded by the government, their members all work in liberal NGO kind of places that are getting funded by the government, and they're afraid of getting purged. And yeah, it's certainly disturbing what has happened to the left. So I don't think that the concern that the person raised there, I don't think that is exactly right. I don't think I'm simply saying that racism isn't important. I'm saying that you can't equate embracing the radical left and the way the left is going with being anti-racist. I don't think the two things necessarily line up. That's my response.
Yeah, and I don't think it's trying to reach out to people who are like-minded doesn't necessarily mean that you're ignoring a racial element. At least I don't take it that way. That was never the way I took it that you were trying to explain it. Caleb, shout out to you, man. Thank you for that. Deeply
Thank you.
Appreciate you. You be safe. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you hopefully next week.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. Shout out to Caleb. I hope he answered your question fully. I when I saw the chat pop up, he was still here. So I figured I would just let Caleb answer that particular question. And maybe that's not a bad idea if there are chats that are aimed at a particular guest, to let the guests deal with the chat. I mean, granted, I can ask them first, but to allow the guests to answer that particular chat and leave maybe 5 minutes or a few minutes at the very end of the conversation to allow the guests to answer it. Let me know if you guys like that idea. Let me know if you like that idea. Yeah, let me know if you like that idea. What time is it? Okay. I don't have time to go into another segment. Jim Jatras is about to join, so he's about to come on to the show. But I can preempt this with this clip, which is just great. So if you remember, Donald Trump comes out, and Donald Trump, in the political interview, makes the point of saying, look, man, if you continuously use the war to not have elections, then at a certain point, you can't call yourself a democracy. Okay, fair enough. Obviously, this is Trump trying to, hey, man, time for you to take the door. This is him shoving Zelensky along, this gentle push. And I'm going to say gentle, I'm putting that in quotes, considering the Nabu Sapo investigations that are taking place in Ukraine that are crawling their way to Zelensky, taking out one person after the next. He took out Yermak. Well, Zelensky is going to be in the crosshairs, right? So Zelensky goes talk to his European backers, and they brainstorm on what to do effectively to give Trump an FU. So what Zelensky comes back with is, okay, the president is saying I need to have an election. How can I deal with this particular issue? Because I don't want Trump to blame me. I want Trump to blame the Russians. I don't want them to blame me. So I need to sound rational and reasonable. So how do I go out and do this? So he comes out with a referendum scheme. So let me see. This is
without Europe and all members of our.
Okay, good. This is in English. All right, I'm going to play this out.
Dear Kier, Emmanuel, and thank you for co-hosting today's meeting. Dear friends, leaders, I'm happy that we have today's conversation. About an hour ago, we had conversation with the United States team about possible security guarantees for Ukraine. And we are working on a framework document, and it must be strong enough to truly work. We believe this document should be approved by the United States Congress. This would mean real, solid, legally binding security guarantees for our country. And they must...
By the way, that's a dead letter. That's not going to happen. Never going to happen. And the reason is very straightforward. The moment that Ukraine is given security guarantees by the United States, depending upon what those security guarantees are, and some of the reporting came out that they were discussing something like a NATO-style security guarantee, which was the entire point of the war, meaning the entire reason that this war is being fought was because Ukraine was knocked over and Ukraine was going to at some point join NATO, which was off the table from the standpoint of the Russian point of view. Oh, my man is here. Let me go to Jim. All right. We are joined with the man himself, Jim Jatras. How you doing, Jim? You doing okay today?
A little older, a little grayer every day.
You see my grade myself, right? Jim
You got,
Dratchers.
you got some catching up to do.
True. True. Jim Jatras, he's a former U.S. diplomat, policy advisor, and analyst for Republican leadership in the United States Senate. Jim, I'm so glad that you could join me today, man. Thank you for this.
Glad to be here.
Trump has, I was showing the audience this, what I call a referendum scheme that Zelensky has come out with. Donald Trump, in a political interview, effectively said, hey, man, it's time to have elections. And so Zelensky goes meet with his European backers or helpers, and he comes out with effectively, well, maybe we can have a referendum. Like, this seems to just be a way to try to game Trump on this. Give me your thoughts on all of this. In fact, you can even go to the 28-point peace plan, because I don't think I've had you on before the plan came out. But effectively, everything surrounding what is culminated into Zelensky coming out saying, okay, maybe we can have a referendum at this point.
Sure. I mean, Jamal, how many times do we have to see this movie? I mean, Trump comes out with something. He talks to the Russians. The Russians say, well, we can talk about part of it, and part of it's not acceptable. And Trump says, oh, the Russians love it, which they don't. And then he comes back and he talks to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and they don't like it at all. But they say, well, here's our counter proposal, which essentially walks it back from whatever small possibility the Russians could even entertain it. And then they dance around saying, well, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. And this is just another twist on it. Oh, maybe I could have a referendum. Maybe I could have elections. Well, maybe I need a ceasefire first. And well, we're going to prepare for war in a few. I mean, how clear does it have to be? Oh, wait. Now we've got Larry Fink from BlackRock involved, along with Witkoff and Kushner. Oh yeah, that's really going to ring the Russians' bells. Oh, there's going to be money in it for us. Oh my goodness, we're all going to make money here. What is this? A New York real estate deal or something? I mean, it's absurd, Jamaro. And look, if there was any hope that anything useful was going to happen, it should have happened months and months ago, is that Trump would say to the Europeans and to the Kiev regime, which is not a real government and not a real state, that look, we're not going to support you anymore. It's the end. And honestly, I don't think he could do that. Even if he wanted to do that, I don't think he can do that. I don't think he knows how to do that. And so, we're going to go through this again. And Trump's going to find himself getting mad now at both sides. And, Putin is really disappointing me, and Zelensky's really disappointing me. I just think this is just another wrinkle on the same old tired script we've seen so many times before. And believe it or not, we still have people saying, "Oh, peace is this close. Yeah, they've almost got a deal. It's gonna happen." I think it's just absurd. I really do.
Why can't Trump do that? Why can't Trump walk? Why can't Trump call it quits? Why can't Trump call Zelensky and say, "Hey, man, you ran a good race.
Yeah,
time for you to go to the showers"? Why? What is the hedge in him doing something like that? Clearly, he has power to do it.
Does he really? Does he have the power to do it? That's the one thing we have to ask. I mean, let's suppose Trump were the different kind of personality that he is, a man who can make a decision, stick by it, and make sure it's carried out. I mean, right there, we're talking about a different human being, aren't we? What he would have to do is be able to impose on the huge bureaucracy of the federal government, the national security apparatus, a decision and make sure it sticks. Now, how's he going to do that? Because he doesn't even know how it works, much less how the people, the lieutenants that will make his decision stick, go down into the bureaucracy and dozens of agencies, hundreds of personnel who are all doing their little thing, and say, stop it. And here's how I'm ordering you to stop it. He doesn't know how to do that. And certainly Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio aren't going to make it happen. Radcliffe over the CIA is not going to make it happen. So he doesn't even know how to do that. But it also would mean he'd have to have the kind of personality that could make a decision, stick to it, not listen to the, whether it's General Keith Cornflake, Kellogg, whatever it is, or whoever it is, the next guy who's going to change his mind, or Marco Rubio. He'll send his little fixers over there to talk real estate deals, or we're going to have an oil bonanza in the Arctic and all that. And they're going to come back and spin all sorts of tall tales and thinking that the Russians are as motivated by deals as he is and his family. And I just don't think either he has the knowledge or the personnel or the personality to make it happen. And we've seen this many times before. Remember his first term, supposedly he'd given orders on several occasions to pull us out of Syria and pull us out of Afghanistan, and it just didn't happen because he doesn't know how to make it happen. So even if he has the right impulse at the right time, which he does sometimes, and sometimes it seems not, he can't deliver, in my opinion.
No, I totally understand. I mean, that from your point of view, though, this is going to have to be settled on the battlefield, not through some level of negotiation.
I think that's true with one caveat, and I think that is that there are still a lot of people in the Russian establishment who would like to see a deal, who think a deal is better than winning it on the battlefield and then let the diplomacy catch up with it. I mean, look, people say, well, a deal's much better. If everybody agrees, that'll be more stable than if the Russians just went on the battlefield. Well, not really. The Russians went on the battlefield when they entered Berlin in 1945. The diplomacy caught up afterward. I mean, you don't have to, once you create facts on the ground, the diplomacy eventually will ratify that fact. On the other hand, if you sign a deal expecting the other side to carry out the terms of the deal, and based on past experience, the West will not carry out the terms of the deal, how stable is that deal? And I think Putin's natural tendencies, which he's exhibited over and over again, is to trust in a deal. I mean, you even have smart guys like Alistair Crook saying the Russians want a legally binding treaty. What good is a legally binding treaty to the West? I mean, I can remember after that we talked about NATO expansion. Well, you should have got it in writing. We didn't agree to that in writing. Get it in writing next time. Well, 1244 resolution on Kosovo, they got it in writing. The West tore it up. The Minsk agreement was in writing. They tore it up. So even if the Russians get a legally binding treaty or Security Council resolution or a decision by the North Atlantic Council that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, who cares? They can change their mind tomorrow. The next president can change their mind tomorrow if they sign a legally binding treaty. So what good is that, I ask?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. From the European side, I mean, they seem to be doing any and everything in their power to effectively keep this going. And there's this kind of looming question of why, like, meaning they have to know what is taking place on the battlefield. Is it just our objective is to expand Russia? Is it we can't tolerate a humiliating defeat of NATO in this sense? Or is there something else going on in regards to the Europeans' point of view on this?
I think in a way it's kind of existential for the Europeans as it is for the Russians. I mean, not in the same sense that the Russians are trying to preserve their state and their national security. But I mean, and this is where I actually do throw a little bouquet to the Trump administration with a national security document they released recently, because even though the regional stuff is not that much of a departure from past policy, and I think a lot of people are reading into it stuff that's not there, the beginning of the document, supposedly drafted by Elbridge Colby, is actually some pretty good America First stuff, including, a vision for the United States, getting rid of DEI, reindustrialization, controlling our borders, all that kind of stuff. Okay, great. Well, who are the European leaders? They're a bunch of grifters. They're a bunch of American puppets, not American like Trump puppets, but maybe more like Joe Biden clones or something like that, who basically hate their own nations, hate their own history, hate their own people, and are there running this big grift through this sort of Manichaean lens that the Russians, not only the Russians, but the Hungarians and the Slovaks and other people in the East are the embodiment of everything they hate and are terrified will arise in their own population, that their own population will start saying, no, we need to put England first, France first, Germany first. And I really think that, that kind of a vision that Trump outlined, or whoever wrote the thing, the national security strategy, is pointing out that these are the kind of leaders they are, and they just need to keep that grift going. I mean, they're all going to retire rich, and they're going to keep it going. Après nous le déluge, after us the flood. We don't care what happens after that. We don't care what happens to Ukraine. We don't even care if there's a war with Russia, because maybe we'll go somewhere else. We'll go, find a nice beach somewhere in Costa Rica when everything blows up in their face. But for the time being, the only thing they can do is keep this thing going as long as they can. And as many Russians and Ukrainians die, what's that to them? They don't care.
Or it seems that Russia is, let's say, taking a more your point of view more so on this, in the sense
Maybe.
of the idea for negotiations have been less prominent. Over and over again, we will accomplish the objective of the special military operation. Siversk has fallen, Volchansk has fallen, Pokrovsk has fallen, Leningrad is surrounded. At some point, Kramatorsk is going to be the only thing left standing, in which case there will be that is going to be the last line in the context of Donbass. Zaporozhye seems to be collapsing in regards to their front.
Yeah.
Every day, Russia's taking more and more territory in this region. So meaning they are accomplishing their objectives on the ground militarily, while this kind of clown show is taking place in Europe and the United States, where they're talking to themselves. Do you think somebody in Russia is listening to your take on this? Effectively saying, look, we can't trust anything coming out of the United States and Europe. And for all intents and purposes, facts on the ground will dictate terms. I know you make the argument that Putin has, let's say, a penchant for wanting a deal.
Yeah.
But that seems to be deprioritized more and more as this goes on.
I think so. And I think there is a division in the Russian leadership. And let's not forget that in Moscow and Petersburg, you have a lot of influential people who are just basically Western liberals. And they would love to go back to the way things were before. They would be more than thrilled to be part of the whole Western, global American empire gay thing if they could get away with it. But they're opposed increasingly by the Siloviki, the power ministries that were sort of put on the back shelf and now are more on the front shelf. And the fact that a lot of Russians, they didn't want to see all this blood and treasure expended for another lousy deal like a Minsk III, which is all the West is ever going to offer to the Russians. I don't know if the Russians have figured that out yet or not. Because look, I just got contacted by a couple of different Russian TV networks, and they're high on hopium again. Oh, does it look like there'll be another peace deal? I mean, of course these are journalists, so who knows what they think, So I think that temptation is always there, but I think it's one of the things where they would love to sell out. At least some of these people would love to sell out for another lousy deal if even a minimally lousy deal were offered to them. But it's not really being offered to them. So they may have no choice but to do what I would consider the right thing from the point of view of their national interest. But it still begs the question, what is their end game? Is it still their demands, 4 oblasts and Crimea and some pledges of denazification, demilitarization? Or do they understand the only way you're going to get denazification and demilitarization is the destruction of the Ukrainian state, Russian tanks in Kiev, and Russia taking everything up until the far west, Lvov and all that they don't need, and either making it all part of Russia or creating what really is a puppet state controlled by the Russians. Do they understand that or not? I think some of them do and some of them don't. And I don't know what their end game is. To all appearances, as you talk about, they're moving forward, but it seems that their approach is more pedagogical. Okay, now will you meet our terms? Now will you meet our terms? And maybe they know nobody's ever going to meet their terms. But when the crack comes, and I think a lot of people have been expecting this, at some point when things unravel in Kiev, things completely collapse at the front. They're crumbling at the front, but they haven't collapsed. When that day comes, what's the aha moment where they say, okay, now all bets are off. We're going to do what we need to do. Or they're going to finally say, now will you agree to our terms and agree to something less than I would consider a stable, long-term solution that meets the root causes of the war if I were in their shoes? I don't know the answer to that.
I think I'm not in their minds, obviously, but I think what they're looking at is this kind of RAND Corporation document of this plan to overextend the Russians. And if you have to effectively take over the entirety of Ukraine and you have to, bring up 3 million men in order to do it, you fulfill the obligations of the RAND document at the destruction of Ukraine. From your point of view, that's just life. Meaning, there's no way out that box. The moment that the special military operation started, there was no way to stop this special military operation. It was always going to go to fruition because there was never a deal to be had at that point. There was no way to stop.
And I think that's the mistaken expectation they went into this conflict with. I don't agree, however, that it would be overextending Russia for them to, say, liquidate the Ukrainian state and take the whole thing. Because I think there are enough Ukrainians that are sick to death of this thing that you create a Ukrainian administration. You take somebody like, just to throw some names out there, former Prime Minister Azarov or somebody like Medvedchuk, say, okay, you're now the head of a new administration. All you Ukrainians who didn't want this, all you Ukrainians who know what the Western powers did to you, we're going to create a new regime in Kiev or somewhere else, and we're going to back it up. And look, I mean, back in 2014, when all the Maidan occurred, the Russians gave Yanukovych a backup guarantee. You do what you need to do. You clear all those people off the streets of Kiev. You use whatever force you need to use, and we'll give you everything you need to do it. He could have done it, but he didn't want to. He thought he could finesse his way out of it. You get somebody in there who, if you will, be another Lukashenko, like in Belarus, and say, yeah, I'll do whatever I need to do to maintain order here, and it will be done by Ukrainians. The Russians will back us up, but it will be done by Ukrainians. I think that would be very, very possible.
Yeah, basically, there's a way around it without necessarily
overextending
the
Russian
Russian
flag.
military.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think so.
There is a conversation apparently in the Washington Post where the West is once again talking to itself about security guarantees.
Right.
This seems like a non-starter. Like it seems like a pathway to a third world war. But give me your take on this. I mean, are there security guarantees that would be accepted by the Russians?
I can't see any. It gets back to the basic question that we've been discussing. Do they want to try to, split the baby here and come up with a deal to give the other side a face-saving way out? Oh, well, yeah, we'll accept that you have some role in Ukraine's future security. Or do they say, yet this has nothing to do with you anymore? This is now within our security zone. We will provide the security guarantees to whatever is left of Ukraine or whatever new Ukrainian state is created. End of discussion. We don't need you guys. I mean, this is where it gets back again to the national security document. You have so many people, again, I think high on hopium, who say that, oh, the Americans are walking away from Europe. We're doing no such thing. We would like to change the regimes in European countries, but we still want them to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP. We still want to build up Europe as a military force. They say, well, to provide for their own defense. Defense against who? Well, obviously the Russians. Obviously, we will still want them to be a big anti-Russian force in Europe that we'll sell weapons to. We'll make a lot of money there too. So I don't see any prospect that this adversarial Western attitude toward Russia is going to change anytime soon. And if you have that kind of adversarial mindset in the West, how can the Russians accept a Western security guarantee in Ukraine under any circumstances if they have their head screwed on straight, which maybe they do and maybe they don't?
What do you make of the corruption bureau, Nabu Sapo, effectively going after all of these creatures, this corruption that they apparently just found a few weeks ago? It's like, hey, there's gambling. What? It's like they're shocked by the whole thing, right? It's like, oh my God, who knew there was gambling here?
Well, they got an email from a Nigerian prince in Kiev asking him to invest in a scheme. Wait. Nabu, isn't that the planet in Star Wars where the Ewoks live? I think it's
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I guess the funny thing to me about this is like they're acting mainstream media with all the sincerity in the world.
Yeah.
It's like we've just now 2 weeks ago uncovered corruption in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And it's only $100 million.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, get out of here, guys. It's like, are you being serious right now? Hundreds of billions of dollars has been shuffled through Ukraine, and they're like, it's only $100 million. What do you make of this? Obviously, the United States is exerting pressure in this case. What is the idea? Getting rid of Zelensky? His time is up.
Yeah, we could draw a leaf from our South Vietnam experience and put Zelensky on the per diem plan, if you catch my drift. That's one way to get rid of him. The other way, all this, a lot of people are saying his days are numbered. I don't know that. I think it really depends on whether MI6 wants to get rid of their client puppet there and put somebody in like Zelensky from, bring him in from London, which, instead of having a Jewish actor pretending to be a Ukrainian Nazi, you can have a real Ukrainian Nazi. That'll be a big improvement, It's okay. So I think you're right. I think that's partly the West, and namely the Americans, trying to put some pressure on Kiev to say, look, there's a really good deal on the table. Why won't you accept it? Here, we'll turn up the heat on you. But I think it's also some of the infighting in Kiev that I think the regime is visibly starting to crumble. I don't know how fast it will crumble, but I think this is also internal infighting, various corrupt politicians accusing each other of corruption. Because it's a political weapon for their internal disputes as well. So, like you say, everybody's always known. I think various characters, both external and internal, are trying to turn up the heat on one another. But I don't know that actually amounts to anything until there's, again, a real crack in the regime and it collapses. I don't know how close we are to that, really.
What happens when that crack takes place?
I don't know. Same thing with when the crack takes place on the front. I don't know. And that all gets back to Moscow. It really depends on what they want to do and how much they want to, frankly, fool themselves into thinking somebody is going to actually make a real deal with them. And I, like we said earlier, I don't know the answer to that question.
They do seem to want a deal. I always make this argument that Moscow is chasing safety. That from their point of view, they don't want to take West Ukraine. All things being equal, they want this to be over with. But I would imagine there are factions in Russia, as you point out, that we're not in the business of another Minsk, one or two. We're not in the business of another Istanbul. Meaning, is there a pressure that's being applied to Putin? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism also in Russia on Putin's, let's say, slow, methodical, continued negotiation stance. Will that pressure affect how he ultimately handles any kind of resolution to this conflict?
I think it does. I mean, again, it needs to be said one more time. Putin is not a dictator. He's not Stalin. He cannot just say, I want to do this, I want to do that. He's got a balance between factions there. And we don't know how powerful some of these factions are. Some people say he's really a puppet of the Chabad organization. He's a Jewish puppet, just like Trump is. Look, I don't know what to make of all that. I think a lot of people miss the discussion though about the regions of Ukraine. They think of the east, the south and the east, everything from Odessa to Kharkov, and say, okay, that's essentially Russian. And then you've got the west. And when I talk about the West, I mean the far, far West. I mean like Uzhgorod and Lvov, these areas that were part of the Austrian Empire before 1914 and part of Poland before 1939. That's the far, far West. And the Russians have made it clear they don't want that. But everything east of that, including all of Ukraine from Kiev all the way over to the far west, Zhytomyr, places like this that are Ukrainian-speaking areas that were in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, they're not as virulently anti-Russian as the places in the far west are. And I think those are eminently, if you will, annexable by Russia, or at least the basis of a Ukrainian state that would not be a problem for the Russians. So when we say the West, I think that quote West is in a very different category from the far, far West. And I'm sure the Russians understand this. But on the other hand, we don't even, people say, well, once Pokrovsk falls, it's off to the Dnieper River. Well, really? I mean, they've shown, they're still creeping into Kharkov. They're still creeping, as you said, in Zaporozhye. There's talk that they're moving into the direction of Odessa. But my sense is they would rather not do that. I think that's a mistake. I think they should do that. I think if this war ends with anything less than everything from Odessa to Kharkov, it is objectively a defeat for Russia and an invitation to the next war, which will be even more devastating and maybe total uncontrolled war that we could all, kiss various body parts goodbye.
Is this document, the National Security Strategy by Trump, assuming it's even actionable, is it a break in the U.S. European association or connection, or do you see it that way? I mean, he obviously, his contempt for Europe is breathtaking in this document.
I don't see it that way at all. I don't see it. I see a lot of people saying, well, it's this document shows the Americans are walking away from Europe. I don't see that at all. Remember, to walk away from Europe means that we have to renounce Europe as a sphere of American influence. And there's nothing in the document. A lot of people say, well, this is a multi what is it?
Multipolar world. That's what they say. Like,
You
it's
know,
like, oh, this is
spheres of
multipolar.
influence and all that, because we're doubling down in the Western Hemisphere and enhanced the Monroe Doctrine. We got to go kill Venezuelans or whoever. No, certainly we are reconsolidating in a very stupid way, in my opinion, our dominance in the Western Hemisphere. But you notice there's not a syllable in there indicating that we're going to grant recognize spheres of influence of other powers, the Russians, the Chinese, and so forth. Like with China, they talk about, well, first island chain, South China Sea, and all that. Like, we still have to be the regional hegemon there, even though it's right on China's shore. In terms of Europe, people say, well, the European section says we're going to reach an accommodation with the Russians. It doesn't say that. It just says we want a stable relationship between Europe and Russia. What does that mean exactly? What I think we're seeing here is kind of like what happened, and I've always compared Trump to kind of an American Gorbachev, who will produce similar results, by the way, in my opinion. That just as the Soviets got rid of all the little Brezhnevs in Eastern Europe and installed little Gorbachev reform communists, I think what Trump would like to do, or whoever wrote that document, is get rid of all the little Joe Bidens in Europe and install little Trumps, instead of having all these globalist, like I described earlier, anti-national, anti-historical, self-hating globalist leaders who are U.S. puppets. We want to have pro-American, little Viktor Orbáns all over the continent. A French Orbán, maybe Marine Le Pen, or maybe somebody like Nigel Farage in London, and so on and so forth. Which, in my opinion, would be an improvement. But it hardly means America walking away from the continent. It means we'd have more reliable leaders that we could count on to actually mobilize their populations against Russia and be a real force against Russia compared to these idiots that they have there now. So I think that's the real thrust of the document if you read the document carefully. If you separate the rhetoric in the first part from the regional outline of policy that you find in the latter part of the document, which is one reason why the document is so incoherent.
One last question. Venezuela.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on with this? Like, it seems outrageous. He's just murdering people in the Caribbean. They just stole the oil tanker.
Yeah.
And, I think it's like 20-30% of U.S. military hardware in regards to the Navy is sitting in the Caribbean right now. And yet he hasn't pulled the trigger on using that hardware. It seems like there's some quibble within the administration on doing this. I mean, I think I've made the argument, and other people made the argument, Trump has fallen into a trap of his own making on this because there's no win in this. But give me your take. What do you think is going on?
Well, there could be a win. I mean, there were reports that Maduro had offered Trump essentially, the sun, moon, and the stars. That you want to come in, have your companies come in, help us exploit Venezuelan energy resources and all that. We're open to that, and I think he could have taken a win. And I think would have been a rather substantial win. I don't think it was a necessary win for the United States, but if it means we're going to get dealt in to whatever the resource issues are in Venezuela, I think that would have been something where he can say, hey, I just solved my 18th war or whatever it is. I don't think he's willing to take that offer. And again, I don't know who is. Everybody's saying, and I assume it's true, that Marco Rubio is the guy who's taking the lead on this, and he is bound and determined. There's got no deal. Even if they bare their throat and offer us everything, that's not good enough. He's got to go, and we have to have regime change, and we need to dictate who rules in Caracas. And I think, unfortunately, you're like you said, he's painted himself into that corner. With anything less than that now is a defeat for him. So we've gone, from murder on the high seas to piracy on the high seas. And I don't know what their next move is going to be. And somebody has compared our buildup in the region to, pulling back on a bowstring. You can only stand there for so long doing that before you either release it or you shoot the arrow. And I think the indications are growing that we're going to shoot the arrow. And it looks also like the Russians and the Chinese are doubling down on their pledges of support to Maduro. And, and maybe there's a temptation for them to say, oh, well, you wanted to bleed, the Russians say, you wanted to bleed us white in Ukraine. Well, maybe we'll bleed you white in Venezuela when you go in.
We'll do the same. Yeah.
Maybe Venezuela turns into our Ukraine. And maybe it works out better for the Russians there than it did work out for us in Ukraine.
Do you think he'd be crazy enough to put in U.S. troops?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
I mean,
is-
one scenario I've heard, what makes a lot of sense, actually, if anything makes sense here, is that they do sort of what the Soviets did in Afghanistan. You have a coup in the capital and a new government installed, and then they invite you in to fight the rebels. So it's possible we have assets in Caracas. They stage a coup, overthrow the government, claim to be the new government of Venezuela, invite American allies in to suppress the remnants of the old regime that are still loyal to Maduro's regime. So maybe that's the scenario. I don't know.
Jim, great breakdown. Always a great breakdown. Always appreciate you, man. Jim Jatras. He's a former U.S. diplomat, policy advisor, and analyst for the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate. Jim, you have my appreciation and thanks, man. Thank you for this. Be safe, okay?
Thank you, Jamal. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Shout out to Jim. Shout out to Jim. Shout out to Jim. Great breakdown. We are waiting for Dimitri. Oh, we are no longer waiting for Dimitri. We're going to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. Dimitri Lascaris. How you doing, man? You doing okay this morning?
I'm good, Jamal. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Better that you are joining me. Thank you for joining me today, man. Apologies for yesterday. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. He runs the great show, Reason to Resist. Your content has been fantastic, Dimitri. So definitely keep up the good work, man.
Thank you.
There is an interesting story that has come out by Barack Rabbit. Now he writes for, what is it called? Axios, if I'm not mistaken. And he comes out and puts out, U.S. officials told European diplomats that if their countries won't send soldiers to the ISF or support the countries that do, Israel military won't withdraw from Gaza. Quote, the message was, if you're not ready to go to Gaza, don't complain that the IDF stays, unquote. Now, this is based on an article they came out with. Effectively, the Trump administration is planning to appoint an American two-star general to command the International Stabilization Force in Gaza. It doesn't seem like the countries are all that on board for being a part of this force. I could be wrong. It doesn't seem like they're all that enthused.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're asking me for my reaction to this, I imagine.
Yes.
The first time I've heard this, I've been saying for some time that Axios is kind of like the go-to platform for the U.S. political elite when they want to plant a fake story in the public discourse. And I don't know. I'm in no position to say whether these conversations actually took place between the administration and European governments. But even if they did, there is an element of fakeness that is readily apparent to me here. And that is Trump knows going in that this is demand that's going to be rejected. There's absolutely no way that the Europeans are going to send their forces into Gaza to try to disarm Hamas. They're going to say, we're going to end up taking casualties. We're going to end up killing Palestinians ourselves. Our populations are already seething with anger at what we have allowed Israel to do and enabled Israel to do. Just imagine how they're going to react if we send our soldiers in there and we start killing people. And besides, we don't want the casualties. They're not going to stand for the casualties on our side. So he knows in advance that that is a futile request. So why is he making it? Simply to provide Israel with a pretext for not going to the second stage of the so-called ceasefire agreement. And this is what many of us have been predicting from day one. This was all about just getting the hostages, the prisoners of war out. They got them. And now they're going to just continue with the genocide, which they have been doing effectively since October 11th, when this thing came into effect. This to me is like the final nail in the coffin. If this story is true, if Trump is actually now resorting to putting pressure on Europeans, and by the way, quite apart from their own population's anger with all of this, they are talking about going to war with Russia. So they're going to commit their troops, their tiny little armies, to trying to police the Palestinians in Gaza and disarm Hamas. That too is a reason why this is a non-starter for Europeans. Their entire focus is upon the supposed aggression that they're anticipating from the Russian Federation. So I think that this is pretty much the nail in the coffin then of stage 2 of the agreement, if this story has any truth to it at all.
Yeah, I think you're right on 2 points. One, I think it was always a non-starter that these countries were going to be willing to put their people in. And by the way, even Arab countries, like I don't get the sense that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, any of these countries are all that jazzed up to put troops into Gaza. So there's that. And I guess to your point, they knew that going into this, that this was going to be a tall order, that this wasn't something that was going to be acceptable going in. Basically, there was never going to be phase two. The entire point, get the hostages and then deal with it from there. But what I suspect is also true is, well, if you don't put your troops in, the Israelis apparently just have to stay, which may have also been the ultimate objective.
Yeah, that's what I mean by there's no stage. Stage two is where they're supposed to withdraw, right?
Yeah.
So that's the part that the Trump administration is signaling that ain't going to happen, because it's, you know, conditioning the withdrawal of Israeli troops on something that it knows the Europeans are unwilling to do. And by the way, when it comes to these other countries, there was a lengthy, we talked about this in our program a couple of weeks ago. There was a long, detailed piece. It was either the Washington Post or the New York Times, which said that the International Stabilization Force is going nowhere. And they were quoting officials from Gulf autocracies. They were quoting Indonesian officials who were saying, we're not going to disarm Hamas. Someone else is going to have to do that. We're willing to go in there as peacekeepers, but we're not going to go to war with Hamas. And the whole tenor of the article, quoting officials from these governments, some of whom were on record, was the ISF is going absolutely nowhere. So that option has gone off the table already. And if Trump is saying that now the Europeans are going to have to, you know, fill the void, it seems to me quite clear that this is a pretext for Israel remaining in the Gaza Strip, which is what people should have anticipated all along, Jamal. You know, look what they did to the first ceasefire under Trump. Israel they got some hostages, some prisoners of war out, the ones that the resistance was supposed to give up, they gave them up, and they just tore up the agreement. The next stage was they were supposed to withdraw from Rafah in March. They said, no way, hell no, we're not leaving Rafah. They just completely tore up the agreement and began starving the population. So why would anybody think that they would, you know, carry out the second phase of this agreement after they got the prisoners of war out?
Yeah, agreed. And I think this was what anybody that was paying attention who realized Israel has never accepted the terms of any of these deals like this was, yeah. Speaking of that, and I'm glad you brought that up. This is an interview Tucker Carlson had with, I believe this is Qatar. And this is fascinating to me on so many levels. So I'm going to get your take on what is being discussed here. Because Qatar is effectively saying, we're not rebuilding Gaza. You're not sticking us with that paycheck. And, you know, a lot of people at the time thought, well, the Gulf states have all of this money. They're obviously going to be the ones to rebuild it. Listen to what's being said here.
That's been destroyed by. Now there's the question of who rebuilds Gaza, which has, of course, been completely destroyed, and who pays for it. And I wonder, well, I don't wonder, I just imagine with total certainty that you will be asked to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. Why would you do that? Why would you rebuild a region that's been destroyed by a country that also bombed you?
Well, look, Tucker, here there is like very.
That's a hell of a question, ain't it?
No kidding.
Say like an ironic situation when you look at like two conflicts happening at the same time, and you are hearing like many about when it comes to the Russia-Ukrainian conflict that Russia should fund all the reconstruction and their assets should be seized to fund all the reconstruction of Ukraine. While when you are talking about Gaza and Israel, flattened this land, and you say that Israel has the responsibility to rebuild what it's destroyed, they will tell you no. You will have, as a region, you will have the responsibility to do so. And it's really a very ironic double standards when you look at it. From our side, as the state of Qatar, we will continue supporting the Palestinian people. We will do whatever to alleviate their suffering, but we are not the ones who are going to write the check to rebuild what others do.
We are not the ones that are going to write the check to rebuild what other people have destroyed. He says it flat out. And he makes another good point, right? Like, it's like, we need to steal Russian money in order to rebuild Ukraine. And it's like, well, hey, should Israel do that? Shh. It's like, shh. They fired that journalist who asked that exact same question, by the way.
Yeah.
Give me your thoughts.
Well, I think I've been saying this again on my program for months, is that when the Russians are asked, so for example, this 28-point peace prank that this con man Steve Witkoff just developed,
Right.
it basically envisioned that that Russian money was going to be just confiscated, and the Russians were supposed to sign off on hundreds of billions of their own central bank funds being stolen by the West. And what I said when I critiqued this was, the Russians must be looking at this as, are you kidding us? Did somebody try to seize American funds when they invaded Iraq and they destroyed the country in a criminal war of aggression? Is somebody trying to seize Israeli state funds after they've carried out a genocide for 2+ years and absolutely flattened Gaza? No. So why would the Russians capitulate on this point? They're never going to agree to this. Why should they? Even if you believe that they have some obligation, legal or otherwise, to rebuild Ukraine, they're looking at the double standard and saying, to hell with you. We want our money back. So this is entirely predictable. And I'm actually surprised that because Qatar at the end of the day is a vassal of Washington, right? It's the biggest U.S. military base in the Middle East, is right there next to Doha. So this is, I think, a sign of the times, both that Tucker Carlson is willing to ask that question, and that he's willing to say flat out, no way, we're not paying for it this time. And effectively, the last thing I'll say about this, Jamal, is this would be a bailout of Israel. Israel has been bailed out repeatedly for its criminality. Both militarily and economically, it's been bailed out. So it's about time that these people in West Asia, these Gulf autocracies, say, we're not doing this anymore. We're basically facilitating Israel's destruction of Gaza. It's rebuilt, they destroy. It's rebuilt, they destroy. They never pay for a damn thing, let alone send their war criminals to jail. So that's the right approach. And the question now is, what are the Americans and the Israelis going to do? Well, my prediction is they're going to just continue this genocide, which is exactly what they're doing.
That is such a good point, Dimitri. That is such a good point. It's a bailout, right? It's like, so we destroy, completely flatten, like, let's say 80, 90% of this territory. And then somebody else comes in and pays for the rebuilding of it. Okay, so if Qatar is like, well, we will support the Palestinians, by the same token, we are effectively subsidizing Israel's genocide, then you're effectively working on both sides of this equation in a way that is only serving the people who are actually committing the genocide in the first place. Oh, that's such a good point. That is such a good point. I guess the other question is, what about the other Gulf states? What about Saudi Arabia? What about UAE? What about et cetera? Would they be conned into doing this? They bought Donald Trump a airplane. There's that. On top of that, all the investments and everything else. Meaning, when Donald Trump was at that conference, they seemed very subservient to Trump on this. I guess the question is, do you think they're going to stand by this or not so much? Obviously, Qatar is pissed off that they got bombed by Israel, so they have their feelings right now. Is that going to remain? I guess that's the question. I guess there's no way to answer that question in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know. Qatar, like you said, they have a real political pickle here because their people are upset about having been bombed. And there was never any price imposed on Israel for that naked aggression on Qatar. There was no price, zero. So for them to now bail out Israel would, I think, be quite annoying to the population and possibly cause significant political unrest. Maybe the Saudis don't have that much of a problem politically because they themselves were not bombed and they have a lot more money. So they might pony up some dough. But as I say, at the end of the day, there has to be some form of accountability for Israel if this is going to stop. So it can be economic accountability. It can be you send the war criminals to jail. It can be, sanctions. You cut off the flow of weapons. If there's no accountability, it'll not only continue, Jamal, it's going to get worse. So it's now spreading to the West Bank. Okay. In fact, it's arguable that what's happening in the West Bank is as bad or worse than what is currently happening in Gaza. More terrorization of the population. And then it'll spread to East Jerusalem. And then finally, they'll start, ethnically cleansing 1948 Israel. The 20% of the population that is Palestinian is going to then be subjected to genocide. We have to impose accountability to stop this from escalating. It's as simple as that. And they won't even make Israel pay for the reconstruction of Gaza, for God's sakes. God, what do you think is going to happen next? We're sending a message again to Israel that you can get away with any crime. You can do it in the most audacious manner possible. Every every imaginable atrocity being perpetrated before the eyes of the world, and there'll be no cost to you. The natural outcome is going to be escalation of its depravity. That's what we've been witnessing for decades.
Yeah, and this doesn't even take into account Lebanon, Syria.
Yeah.
At this point, like basically it's metastasizing in severe ways. Speaking of Israel, Netanyahu came out with a statement. Apparently he was in the Knesset, and he makes this astonishing statement that Israel has never killed kids. Did you see this? I'm trying to find the exact clip. But basically, look, you know, we don't kill kids. This is not something that we effectively do. The people who are implying this are effectively lying through their teeth about it. Is there, for somebody like him, do you think there are ever going to be consequences for him? Or no, he's just going to, right here, here's the clip. We never killed children in Gaza. This is the argument that he's effectively making. He's saying this openly, apparently, to the world.
פוליטית, שאני לא רציתי להחזיר את החטופים, רציתי לראות אותם מתים, שחיילי צה"ל רוצחים תינוקות כתחביב. אנחנו נלחמים באנטישמיות הזאת בכל העולם. העברנו עכשיו, רק עכשיו, למעלה מ2 מיליארד שקל למשרד החוץ, כדי להילחם בתעמולה הזאת. אני מאמין שצריך להילחם בה בשיטות חדשות.
In a nutshell, he says the people who are saying that we're killing kids as a hobby, this is anti-Semitism, and we're fighting anti-Semitism all over again. And we've donated all of this money or contributed all of this money in order to fight this level of anti-Semitism for people saying as such. Mm-hmm. This is outrageous. He's acting like there are no videos of Israeli soldiers getting their kicks off murdering children, or for that matter, murdering people in general, but the overwhelming majority of which are children.
Right. And he's also acting as if, you know, Yoav Gallant didn't say we're going to starve the population. Or, you know, Israel Katz didn't say we're going to deprive them of all humanitarian aid, which they did. So not only were they shooting them in the head, burning them alive, blowing them to smithereens, terrorizing the hell out of them, but they're starving them. And they've been doing it openly and brazenly. And what is really, I think, shocking, who's shocked anymore with this crazed lunatic? But, you know, they're going to give 2 billion shekels to counter the propaganda instead of giving the 2 billion shekels to the starving children of Gaza. That tells you all you need to know about the priorities of the genocide.
Care about those. Yeah, they don't care about those. They don't care about those. I think you made the point earlier. That's not their concern. That's not what they all that much care about. Yeah. I don't. Do you see consequences meted out to the Israeli state beyond, like, for example, what is the internal dynamics of Israel? There was an article that came out by a guy who made the point of saying, all of Israel's enemies are still existing. So, sure, you've murdered a lot of people, but Hezbollah still exists. Hamas still exists. Iran obviously still exists, meaning these groups are still in existence, regardless of the people that you've been able to kill. And the internal dynamics of Israel in and of itself is not necessarily all that great. You've had a country of 8 million people that have been at war for the last, 2-3 years, give or take. You've had all of these people who've been eating their guns, suffering from depression en masse, which is amazing, I guess. Even Nazis suffer from depression at some point, I suppose. What is the internal dynamics of Israel at this moment? Or is that something that I can ask? Is that something you're aware of in any real sense?
Well, let's just focus on the spiraling mental health crisis in Israel for a moment. Tamor Shimoni, the deputy head of Ministry's Rehabilitation Department, the Israeli Ministry of Defense's Rehabilitation Department, a few days ago told Army Radio that the ministry treated 85,000 soldiers for mental health issues. She said the number was unprecedented. She said 1/3 of Israeli soldiers face psychological problems linked to the events of October 7th, you know, which really means linked to their depravity in Gaza. Of course, she's not going to say that. She said that a single therapist now handles up to 750 patients, and in some areas even more. And in November, a major Israeli media outlet, Yedioth Achronoth, warned of, quote, widespread psychological crisis in Israel, citing rising drug addiction and nearly 2 million people in need of mental health support, including a large number of soldiers. So this isn't confined to the military personnel of Israel. This is a broader problem within Israeli society. So Israel is kind of, it is suffering very adverse consequences. It's just those consequences are not being imposed by the outside world, by the organized international community. But there are impacts on Israeli society. Quite apart from that, there are people who fled the country. The Israeli, there was this wild, I couldn't believe it. Paul Krugman, a couple of weeks ago, just out of the blue, I didn't even know he had a YouTube channel. He did a 30-minute piece on the financial and economic warning signs in Israel. He said they're flashing red. And he focused on a number of factors, but the primary one was the cost of sustaining these wars and the indirect costs of the wars on Israeli society. And he said that the military budget is now unsustainable. If there's another blow up in the conflict with, let's say, Hezbollah, or even worse, Iran, this is going to have devastating impacts on Israel's finances. And he said you could see this country, it's a serious risk that the country will descend into an economic death spiral. That's the kind of language he was using. Paul Krugman, who, as far as I know, is a Zionist. He works for the New York Times. He definitely isn't a harsh critic of Israel. So economically, the country is reeling. It still has the capacity, though. And as long as the United States is funneling weapons and money, and now I understand that Congress is looking at another, chunk of dough for the genocidal entity, as long as the United States continues to subsidize Israel's depravity, this could go on for some time. But internally, Israel is a mess. It's an absolute mess. And in the long run, this is unsustainable. One way or another, it is going to crash and burn. It's just a question of when we're going to put a stop to this. How much more killing are we going to allow it to engage in? And so far, there's no indication that the international community is serious about putting a stop to this depravity. And by that, I mean governments. I'm not talking about civil society. Civil society definitely wants an end to the depravity. But the governments have not caught up in the West with the feeling of the general feeling of the population.
One last thing, considering you're being a lawyer, the ICC, Donald Trump is trying to get the ICC to rewrite the rules in order to protect Donald Trump. I suppose that his concern is, well, I've been murdering people in the Caribbean, basically committing mass murder of civilians. And I don't want the ICC, who went after Benjamin Netanyahu, they went rogue in this one moment. I don't want them potentially coming after me. Obviously, what happened with Khan is astonishing. I don't know if you've read behind the scenes in regards to what the United States had done to him in regards to the sanctions and how they closed his bank accounts. They just ruined his life. And this was the way they were effectively exerting pressure on the court. What are your thoughts on this? For one, do you think the court is going to acknowledge this? The United States is not a signatory, but countries that are signatories, obviously, you can go after them just through countries that are signatories. We already have Attack the Hague Act, so I'm not even sure why Trump needs to do this. But give me your thoughts on this.
Well, this has always been, in my view, the primary reason why the U.S. government is so hostile to the International Criminal Court. It wasn't because they were primarily concerned about Israelis being prosecuted. They thought that they go after them. Why would they not come after us? We're the ones who are arming and funding Israel, and sometimes directly engaging in criminal acts of aggression in support of Israel. So this was always the primary motivation. In fact, if you go back to this Attack the Hague thing, this travesty that they adopted, some people like Lindsey Graham were openly saying, if they can do this to Israel, they can do this to us. So that was always the concern. And, is the International Criminal Court going to have the gumption? They should have indicted, U.S. presidents at the time of their founding, because they actually came into existence during the first Bush, the George Bush's Jr. first administration, when they launched this criminal war of aggression in Iraq, right? So they had, and we learned that they were engaging in torture, which is a crime against humanity. The ICC did nothing, absolutely nothing. It took this genocidal rampage before the eyes of the world for them finally to do something. So I don't have a lot of confidence in the ICC actually doing what is necessary, which is to hold Western leaders to account. That should be their priority, Western leaders to account for their crimes against humanity. And given how pathetically they've performed in the case of Israel, where you had slam dunk prosecutions all over the place, the settlements are a slam dunk war crime. You know, you could send a law student to The Hague to argue the case against Israel that the settlements are a war crime, and that law student would kick Israel's ass because it is so obvious that this is a war crime. There's absolutely no possible defense to the settlements. And they haven't even touched that. The ICC has been coming up with one pretext after another for avoiding prosecution of Israeli leaders because of the settlements. But as I say, I think eventually this will crash and burn, notwithstanding the failures of the ICC to fulfill its mission. It is just a matter of time, and it's a matter of how many people they're going to get away with killing. That's just the horrible reality we're confronting.
Dimitri, always appreciate you, man. Great breakdown. Always a great breakdown. Dimitri Lascaris, lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. He hosts the awesome show, Reason to Resist. Definitely check him out. When is your next show, by the way, just so the audience would know?
We're going to do a live stream today at 11:15 Eastern Time about the National Insecurity Strategy. So if you can join us.
Oh, I love the title, The National Insecurity Strategy. Dimitri, man, always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we have reached the end. We have reached the end. Shout out to Dimitri. We've had a really good show today. Shout out to Dr. Jeff Rich. Shout out to Caleb Maupin. Shout out to Jim Jatras. And shout out to Dimitri Lascaris. I will read this super chat one more time, even though Caleb has already answered this. Like establishment Democrats, your idea isn't to rebuild the left, but to bring in the right. Yeah, I guess that's what they were trying to do with Liz Cheney, kind of. But see, I think there's a difference. Let's read the whole thing first. But to bring in the right to you, it doesn't affect you, so race isn't important enough to stop a coalition. Question: is there a difference between the Democratic Party and the left? And my answer would be yes. There's a vast difference. If you look at what they did with Sanders, and you saw how virulently they went after Sanders, they act like he was some kind of disease, like he was a tumor that needed to be eradicated, then that is honest. Like, they're not doing that for show. They're doing that because that is the way they considered anything they're considered to be ostensibly on the left, especially in the context of the left. In the political sense, that is a tick left to the Democratic Party. If you look at what they did with Mamdani, again, whether these people are hardcore leftists or not, it's irrelevant to the point that the political party considered them to be to the left of them and thereby a threat. So, I mean, you can make an argument that part of the reason Mamdani won is because of how ostracized he was by the establishment Democratic Party. Meaning, they hate the left. Like, these two things are not like the other. Like, these, it's not like when New Deal Democrats came into fruition, you got the kind of old guard with the New Deal saying, hey, we're kind of similar. And because we're kind of similar, you should vote for us and you should back us because we're in the same team. We're in the same coalition. And if nothing else, in 2016, the way they cheated Sanders, that should have gotten across. That was never true. That is the thing that you told somebody in order to keep them voting in your direction. Not that you were in the same political coalition, but that you, for all intents and purposes, just needed a soothing myth in order to keep them voting in your direction. That's all it was. The Democratic Party is not the left. It's the point that I'm trying to make. You may say that they're a tick to the left of the Republican Party. Okay, maybe you can make that case, but they're not the left. The reason I'm making that argument is in this tweet or in this chat, like establishment Democrats, your idea isn't to rebuild the left, but to bring in to the right. My point is, why would they want to rebuild something that they hate? I hope you get my point. Like, this is not a coalition. These two things are not like the other. These are not in the same camp. The left had been deluded, almost like a battered wife, for decades to effectively vote for a political party that in no way helps it accomplish its objectives. Do you honestly believe that voting Democrats get you closer to your objectives of whatever that means in the context of the left? So if you're on the left and you believe in Medicare for all, do you believe that voting for Democrats gets you closer to Medicare for all? Do you believe that voting for Democrats helps you stop the wars? Do you believe that voting for Democrats helps you corral corporate power in the way that it's articulated and used? Do you believe, and you can go down the list on those items? And the answer is obviously no. It's just not. It's a different political coalition. It's like if you were in the UK or something. It's one thing to vote for the Greens. It's one thing to vote for Liberal Democrats. It's one thing to vote for Labor. Okay, these are different political parties. I'm saying these are different political parties. And each political party will take you in a particular direction. But voting for a political coalition or a political party that doesn't believe in what you believe in, it's not going to take you in the direction of the things that you actually believe in. I hope you get my point. Why would they try to rebuild something that they ultimately hate? And in 2016, and even after, sought to destroy. So there's that. That's the first point. Second point. So you want to bring in the right. Democrats were okay with bringing in people who weren't that radically different from them. Do you honestly believe that your Liz Cheney's foreign policy is all that much different than Joe Biden's foreign policy? It's not. And you may get things around the edges that may be somewhat different. So yeah, Liz Cheney is going to vote for the majority of the time with Donald Trump. And she did predominantly. But on things like war and peace, on things like, she thought Trump was, I guess, impolite, those type of things. Democrats had no issue with that. And more to the point, they liked this idea of having somebody who they consider to be on the right that is going after Trump. They had no issue with that. So yeah, they were perfectly okay with bringing those people into the party because for them, they just want another group of people to vote for them. I hope you get my point. That's not that much different than the destruction of the left. Meaning if you can con the left, even though you guys have different voting priorities, and you can con the right, even though you may have different voting priorities, what is the difference in those things? There isn't one. You could say that these are different wings of the same bird, yes. And you could say that they're trying to con one wing and then trying to con another wing, using whatever they can particularly use in order to get that wing to vote for them, even though it is not necessarily going to take the person where they go. It's just a single issue. Yes. But I'm trying to make this point of, they obviously were never going to try to rebuild the left because they don't believe in that. And if they can bring people in for the right, it's not that they're bringing people in for the right because they give a shit about what they're saying. They just want them to vote in their direction. Both of these particular political wings are being conned in a sense. And if they can con both to vote for them, they just care about the votes. It doesn't affect you because race isn't important enough to stop a coalition. And that's why I disagree. I have always made the argument that the economics is the thing that matters more than anything else. And I truly believe that. If you are dirt poor and free as a bird, you're still dirt poor. You can't articulate any notion of liberty without economic liberty. It's impossible. And if you're trying to build a political coalition, you are far more likely to be able to do that through a person's wallet as opposed to gay, straight, black, white, trans, whatever. Because all of those people who are part of gay, straight, black, white, trans, Native American, Chinese, Japanese, I don't know, Eskimos, whatever. All of those people Eskimos still need to buy groceries. That needs to be on the t-shirt. Eskimos need to buy groceries. Eskimos still need to pay for their car note. Eskimos still need to pay for their house note. Eskimos have kids where they have to clothe and feed, and have dogs that they need to clothe and feed and get healthcare visits. Eskimos also go to the hospital, even though they may have a diet of blubber and whale meat. They still need to go to the hospital. All of these things are expenses. All of these things are costs. Meaning, regardless of your individual identity, you're still stuck with this idea of, I have to pay for things to exist. And therein lies the rub. It's not that Caleb, or for the matter, even me, because I kind of agree with Caleb on this, it's not that you're talking about, hey, let's unite with Nazis. No, that's the Democratic Party that's deciding that they want to unite with Nazis in Ukraine. No. What you are making the argument is that there is a coalition of people that, regardless of their identities, regardless of this other stuff, that for all intents and purposes have a body of ideas, of self-interest even, that they agree with. Not that they love each other per se, but there is a self-interest argument that you can build a coalition and you can foster that coalition. And however you may start out, what you may end up with may be somewhat different over time. But if Caleb is making this argument of like, dude, there are elements of the right that are against being led around by Israel in this case, in the way that they see it, meaning they're against putting all of this money, billions of dollars, into Israel. That's against being in NATO, believing they should pull out. It's against the war in Ukraine. That's will be more inclined to say, well, hey, we need to put money into healthcare as opposed to putting this money into overthrowing Maduro. That is a political coalition. Now you can say, well, what about race in that? Are you of mind that you won't have blacks and whites and gay and straight and trans and Eskimos and Japanese and Chinese, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like, meaning, if you are looking for a political coalition, you're not looking for a political coalition entirely under the lines of, do you agree with everything I agree with? You're looking for a political coalition because you can advance policy objectives that is in your own self-interest and ostensibly in the self-interest of the country as a whole. That doesn't mean that you ignore people being racist. It does mean that if you can create a political coalition that gets you from point A to point B, as opposed to where you are now, where you're effectively standing still, you take the capability of getting you from point A to point B. At no point did Caleb say, hey, let's just ignore people being racist. That wasn't an argument that he was making. Yeah, that was an argument he was making. But we have chats. Let's go to chats. Alexander G, good guess, good stream today. Well, thank you, Alexander G. We didn't have numbers, but still. Diane Thomas, super sticker, Mama Thomas. Thank you for that. Alexander G, YouTube is blocking even positive comments. Supers. Yeah, YouTube can be a pain in the ass with that stuff. They can be a pain in the ass with that stuff. By the way, they block my own comments. When I put out comments, they even block my comments. So there is that. Caleb is saying to ignore racists. That's not what he's saying. Look, I think that you guys are making this assessment that everybody who supports Trump is racist, which is not his take. That's not his take. So, I mean, that's not even my take. You have people who support Trump for different reasons. That's not his take. FedTube is blocking me constantly. I hate that fucking book. It is what he is saying. It is not what he's saying. I beg to differ. We are all slaves within the illusion of freedom. I guess there's a gradient, right? There's a difference between you being a slave, eating a cappuccino, drinking a cappuccino, eating croissant, versus you in a chain gang in Georgia. So yeah, there's a gradient, I suppose. Trump's committed genocide, that's racist. Yeah, but not everybody backs that. I mean, that's a really good point, right? Like, think of the split that is taking place in MAGA, where you get all of these people who are like, why are we doing this? You can look at the polling. The polling is clear. Why are we doing this? Why are we letting Israel commit this genocide? Why are we backing them and committing this genocide? Why are we giving them billions of dollars? Agreed. And the catch is, okay, is that a yay or nay? Do you want to create alliances in the context of stopping that? Or do you want to be pure of heart and just like, hey man, I don't want any part of those people, despite the fact that I actually agree, or we agree on this particular issue? I would rather stop the genocide, frankly. Just being honest, I would rather stop the genocide. We're doing it because they are us. Donald Duck Trump is right. Well, yeah, he's obviously racist. Just effectively trash. That wasn't directed towards you, Jamal. That was replying to a comment I saw in the chat. Oh, no, I didn't take it poorly, Trash Panda. I didn't take it poorly. I was just answering. Yeah, I didn't take it poorly. All right. All right. I used to deny that, but Trump is racist. I used to deny it. Yeah, I don't know why I used to deny it. He was obviously racist. He was obviously racist. Yeah, he was obviously racist. That was always the case. All right. I am going to end this. I am going to say like. I am going to say share. I am going to say subscribe. I'm going to say thank all of you for your support. Whoa, what just happened? There we are. I'm going to say thank you for your support. I'm going to say you can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, Super Sticker, memberships. All of those things help support the content. All of those things help support the show. You have my deepest appreciation for any of the support that you give to this channel. That is including liking the videos and sharing the videos. And I will see you all Monday morning, bright and early. Have a good one all. Be safe. And as I always like to say, be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Have a good one all. Have a good weekend.